Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Naruto Survived Kyuubi's Extraction. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Sasuke. Sakura took a startling step back. Are you coming? Right here? Right now? She was unsure of how to feel as a million thoughts and feelings raced through her mind at once. Sad? Joyful? Excited? Furious? Feeling threatened? Are you afraid? Feeling anxious? Too much to figure out, but not enough time. However, she could identify one of those pulsating sensations: pain. Every time his name was spoken, her heart continued to tighten. When she remembered him, the night he left, she still experienced that twinge of pain. She was getting over him a bit more every day, so it had gotten duller over the years, but she still wasn't prepared for this. Nevertheless, she sensed a change. The pain, hurt, and ache were all still present, but this time, something unusual seemed to have changed. She didn't know why and didn't understand. Again, though, it's not the time. Kato asked, interest glimmering in the vivid green eyes, "Who's Sasuke?" Both teenagers closed their eyes tightly as the wave of guilt struck them simultaneously, hoping the emotion would pass. Naruto muttered, "Something, from my past." His tone reflected Sakura's current thoughts almost exactly. Nearly. Kato's eyebrow went up. He said, "Should we be worried?" With his cerulean eyes brooding on something no one knew, Naruto remained silent and just stared at the ground. Abruptly, he rose, his movements aloof. He said plainly, "Start packing." Sakura gave him a quick look but remained silent. They couldn't handle it at the moment, even though they both fervently wanted their teammate to return with them and be reunited with everyone he had left behind 3 years prior. Sukiya asked naively, "What's the hurry? Don't you want to wait for your friend?" When Naruto glanced in her direction, she flinched away from the intense agony and suffering that glowed in his sapphire eyes. With a pitying glance at the girl with the pink hair, he replied, "No, I can't deal with this right now. We need to leave now." A familiar but gloomy voice reverberated throughout the clearing, "Too late." While Gaara searched the trees with his eyes guarded and the sand slowly beginning to seep out of the tiny hole at the top of his gourd, Sukiya, Raya, and Kato leapt into a defensive stance. Sakura and Naruto, however, did not respond. They were already aware of who was interrupting this gathering. A teenager with raven hair calmly emerged from the trees, his onyx eyes emotionless and lifeless. He wore a black robe over the bottom half of his dark navy blue pants. The long sleeves ended in a flare at his wrists, and the ensemble was complemented by a plain white shirt that was split open down the middle of his chest. A small katana was visible from where it was strapped to his back, and a large purple rope was tied around his waist. Naruto scowled. The boy, who went by Sasuke, said, "Long time, no see Dobi." "So, how's the fox?" The blonde just stared at his old best friend without responding. Sasuke's gaze swept across the crowd behind him, taking in their peculiar characteristics. "So, these are the resurrected Jinchuriki I've heard rumors about. So, they're like your demon pack now? It would sweet you." The insult caused Naruto to wince a little, and the 4 former Biju holders supported him with savage glares. Sasuke looked amused and raised his eyebrows. Then he saw Sakura frozen close to the outer ring of people. His brilliant smile shone as he grinned. His voice was cold and plain with sympathy as he said, "Sakura, what are you doing running with this crowd? You deserve much better than these monsters." Sakura remained silent and didn't even blink. Her indecision and fear turned her to stone. The blonde teenager sighed as he observed her. Kato stepped up to stand next to him as he took a step forward. More like a snort than a laugh. Sasuke nearly laughed. "You still need back up to fight me? Well, I guess not much has changed in the years since we last met," sighed Sasuke. The final straw was that. Naruto's hazy gaze solidified, and his alert focus reappeared. His fists clenched and he scowled. "All of you get out of here. He's my fight, I'll take him alone." Sakura was effectively jolted out of her bewildered reverie by that. She gave her blonde friend a horrified look, but since he was facing away from her, the gesture was pointless. Kato tightened his jaw. The black-haired Jinchuriki thought, "We'll do better to take him together. Besides, it sounds like you haven't seen each other in a while. Who knows what he's capable of now?" Never taking his eyes off his opponent, Naruto shook his head. That would be a fatal error at this point. "Only I can do this. This isn't your fight, this isn't your problem. Now, get back near the campsite and take Sakura with you. I don't think she'll go willingly, but get her out of here in any way possible," he said in a whisper. Sakura appeared a little taken aback. "Go against her will? Damn straight. She would never have allowed him to confront Sasuke by himself. But when Kato gestured for her to come forward, she followed him and the others for reasons she couldn't explain. She continued to watch the two, but she moved peacefully into the tree's shade. Sasuke grinned. The rematch he had been preparing for years was finally here. It was time to finally break the bonds that were preventing him from achieving his objective of killing his brother. Naruto was just 50 feet away, his body powerful and ready, but his eyes revealed everything that was going on in his mind. He clearly wanted to avoid this as much as possible and didn't want to do it. He was aware, however, that Sasuke had not come to speak. The first move was Sasuke, who used his super speed to disappear and then reappear directly behind the blonde. He then delivered a roundhouse kick to the neck, which is a perfect spot to break the spine. Naruto ducked and slid out of the way, barely skidding a few feet in the opposite direction, avoiding the Uchiha's blow just as it appeared that his foot would make contact with bone. With his teeth clenched, Sasuke spun around and landed on his toes. Doden. Retsudo Tenshou. He cried, smashing his hands to the ground with the force he already possessed. As the ground crumpled beneath Naruto's feet, rock fragments clawed at his ankles in an attempt to pull him downward. Naruto used both hands to push down, and then he released his natural ability to fly high into the air with a burst of chakra. Shortly after his feet touched the ground, the earth folded in on itself, engulfing all the green grass fragments in the dark brown ocean of soil. With a snarl, Sasuke gathered chakra in the soles of his feet and then held it in place to prevent it from escaping through the chakra points on his feet. He felt the power swell like a rubber band as he continued to pour it in, and soon he was flying up toward the blonde who was now falling freely. As he approached, Naruto made the famous hand signal for one of his most frequently used jutsu. He exclaimed, "Kage Bushin!" and a clone materialized beside him. With a grunt of effort, the clone grabbed his arm and yanked him away, launching him at least 5 feet from the area he had just been in. Unable to change his trajectory, Sasuke flew straight past, climbing in a broad circle before crashing back to earth. After landing, Naruto stepped aside. Sasuke was losing altitude quickly, and they both knew he couldn't stop it. Naruto sighed. He wasn't going to watch Sasuke die, even though he knew this was a bad idea and might kill him once he recovered. The teenager backed up and waited as the Uchiha crashed straight into the middle of the wind. Whirling pocket, creating a cushion of air where Sasuke was supposed to land. The boy had a rather dull stop, save for a heavy landing and a violent snapping of his head back. He didn't move or make a sound at first. Before long, though, he was moaning and removing the unseen force that was keeping him afloat. Confusion gripped Sasuke as he realized he had been alive for 1 and 2, hovering in mid-air. He realized that his opponent had saved his life in a matter of seconds. Anger filled his eyes as his coal black ones met the somber cobalt ones. Sasuke swore and leapt from the big bubble, saying, "Saving me will cost you your life." Sasuke charged up his favorite attack, which he had learned from one of the Junin back in Konoha, and formed a chain of hand signs after Naruto dispelled it. The air around them was supercharged by the energy of the lightning that crackled in his hand and swung into a tightly wound circle. Silently, Naruto extended his hand and observed the blue winds circling the central point, the compressed air forming a ball of mass destruction as it swirled in an interlocking circle. The shinobi in the forest were taken aback. They were aware that only a small number of people truly understood how to use and wield their power, having heard about these two attacks. The idea of seeing how they were done and the potential harm they could do filled them with both excitement and fear. Sasuke displayed his completed ball of energy, but Naruto was advancing it from stage 1 to stage 2, increasing the sphere's power level. The orb glowed even brighter, turning more silver as he used his wind element, and the winds inside intensified. The blonde was encircled by a storm, like vortex as the intensity of his attack increased. As the powerful airstreams whipped at the boy's eyes, drying out any moisture that ventured into the area, his eyes narrowed. Sasuke's eyes grew wide. He had mastered the art of advancing his jutsu to the point where the force more than doubled. At the same time, it was amazing, mysterious, and utterly furious. The ball of crackling energy grew as Sasuke poured all of his energy into his Chidori. Both attacks were now prepared and strong, but neither side was certain which would win. With their jutsu spinning powerfully at their sides, both ran at each other. The suspense of the moment seemed to slow time, and the two of them soon found themselves closer. Finally, the two extended their arms and made contact in a dazzling display of light. The sound was high, pitched and shrill, a combination of sparking lightning and whistling winds. For many seconds, the light flashed and remained full and bright. As Sakura waited for the smoke, dust, and light to subside, she could feel the tension and anxiety rising in her stomach. Oddly enough, though, she wasn't completely concerned about Sasuke's safety. She discovered that she was hoping Naruto would emerge victorious when the wall of debris cleared. She was initially taken aback by the ideas. Sasuke's safety had always been her top concern and her top priority. Now, however, things were different. Everything was in a state of flux and change. She was unsure of what to think or what was happening. She looked inside her head for the love, the crush, and the need to be with him all the time. The need to stand out and win his acceptance. However, nothing. The wind had carried away all of those old desires and thoughts. Although she was unaware of the exact moment, her love for Sasuke had completely evaporated. Sakura still felt sad that he was gone, and she wished desperately that Sasuke would change his ways and return to them, but it wasn't the same. She no longer considered him more than a lost friend. It was strange. It seemed as though her affections for Sasuke had suddenly shifted to Naruto. No, she couldn't possibly like Naruto, could she? She only wanted to know what had happened at the moment. Even so, she still kind of doubted that she would figure this all out later. The cloud finally lifted, as if someone had picked it off them from above, after another minute of intense, suspenseful tension. In the center of the clearing were two figures, neither of them moving, but still facing one another. The grass was scorched by the major power that had engulfed it just moments earlier, and a huge, dark circle encircled them. Sakura exhaled in relief that they had not killed one another. But when she looked more closely at the field, her thoughts were interrupted. Sasuke stood on the right, and the five of them heard what he had to say. Really, your kind-heartedness is a weakness. Why won't you see that? That true power comes from hatred, not love. The group boldly stepped up to where the two were talking, unable to guess what he was ranting about. The air was still slightly hazy with dust, but it was still clear enough to see through. Sakura was the first to break through the wall and was shocked by what she saw. Sasuke had a few minor gouging wounds close to his shoulder, but his arm was charred and bleeding in several areas. She let out a cry because of her blonde friend. His light hair was transformed into a work of art, streaked in red, black, and gray, and his face was covered in crimson blood. Many areas of his shirt were torn, the fabric hardly in its original shape. His arm, however, was the worst. A sword appeared to have been slashed through his palm and around his elbow. Even the medic was unable to determine the beginning and end of the wound because the entire limb was covered in a glistening liquid. Parts of his finger bones were visible through the skin, and his hand was torn, exposing the muscles. The massive devastation ended at his shoulder, and his side appeared torn up as well, though she could only imagine how badly from this distance. When Sasuke heard her gasp, he looked up and a smile appeared on his face, but it was not genuine or warm at all. See what happens when you run with the wrong people, Sakura. You should think about coming to the real side that actually stands a chance of defeating the Akatsuki, said the Uchiha. Then, leaving them in a flurry of confusion, he vanished into the trees. No matter what her head told her to do, Sakura was immobile. She could only look at the place where he used to stand and do nothing. The only thing that snapped her out of her reverie was Sukiya's gasp, "Naruto, are you okay?" The medic turned and nearly recoiled when she saw the blonde's arm was damaged once more. The lightning had streaked up the sides of his arms, but the majority of the force had been directed toward his palm. His hand had a rather gory hole in the center, with the skin ripped off and some muscle lines visible from underneath. But when she saw that all 5 of his fingers were still present, she exhaled in relief. Bloodied streaks with angular and ferocious designs ran up his arm and ended about an inch above his elbow. They were steaming a little, but she assumed that the electricity must still be in his system because the Kyuubi was no longer there to heal him. Constant waves of pain crashed against Naruto at regular intervals, making him feel sick. Given the looks he was getting from everyone, he knew his hand wasn't a pretty sight and didn't even want to look at it. However, he couldn't simply sit here and feel sorry for the recent events. They had a task to complete. The teenager slapped his face with the biggest smile he could manage at the moment. "Hey, it's no big deal, really. I get injuries like this all the time. Nothing to worry about," he responded. He stood up shakily to demonstrate his point. However, a sharp shock went up his side, and a whispering grunt of pain escaped his lips, betraying his feelings. This jolted Sakura out of her reverie and brought her back to the present. She carefully took Naruto's arm as she turned and moved to his side. When she gently touched the open wounds, she hissed, but he remained silent and kept his eyes away. The large gouge began to steam as the medic glanced over the hole and prepared to use her healing abilities. Her natural reaction when your friend's arm begins to smoke is to jump back a little. However, Naruto remained motionless and merely gazed in awe. At first, it happened so slowly, so much so that you couldn't even tell what was going on. When his skin began to grow and the torn muscles began to heal themselves, the blonde knew what was happening. Sakura approached with wide eyes. In less than a quarter of a minute, the blonde's wound closed, shocking all 6 of them. No one was able to speak, even after the steam had subsided and Naruto's smooth skin was visible. However, they all had the same thought. WWWHHHHHAATTTT. Kato gave a hoarse swallow. His voice was a whisper as he said, "Well, that was a surprise." All the other shinobi could do was nod. With vacant eyes, Naruto ran his fingers up and down his arm while gazing at an unidentified object. Sakura let out a sigh. She didn't move, but she reminded them, "We can't just sit here. He could come back." After giving her a nod, Sukiya began to return to the tree line, with Kato trailing behind. After exchanging a quick look, Raya and Gaara walked away together. They were discussing what had happened and how it could have happened when their voices reached Naruto, who was seated nearby. At last, Sakura and Naruto were sitting alone in the center of a sizable, blackened crater, both of them thinking about their betraying teammate. After a while, Naruto broke the silence that had surrounded them and said, "Come on." With sorrow in his sapphire eyes, he rose to his feet. He extended a hand to assist the medic in standing up and added, "We can walk and be shocked at the same time." Later, traveling once more, there had been silence for the last hour or so, with nobody wanting to or saying anything. Not for the first half, anyway. Everyone then turned to face the blonde expectantly, anticipating an explanation for what had transpired. Naruto sighed after a long period of these looks. He said simply, as if it were the most casual thing he had ever heard, "I dropped the attack when we were about 2 arms length away." Sakura stumbled, and Sukiya let out a gasp. The former sand beholder questioned, "Why?" Naruto gave a gentle, hurt smile. He breathed back, "I didn't want to hurt him, not intentionally. He doesn't deserve that." The warmth poured down his face as he closed his eyes and faced the sun. "Besides, I made someone a promise, I'm going to keep it." Sakura nearly collapsed there, but for some reason she managed to continue walking. For her, he had dropped the attack. For her, it was one of the worst wounds she had seen him sustain in a long time. Since he first met her, he has always gone out of his way to make her happy. And she didn't start showing him kindness in return until long after she graduated. In an attempt to maintain her composure, the girl with the pink hair suppressed her feelings. It would do absolutely no good. After a few more minutes of the 6 walking in silence, Kato questioned, "Who was that exactly?" Naruto looked away, taking in the view. The blonde replied, "He's an old friend." Raya winced. She responded to his response by saying, "Doesn't seem like much of a friend, seeing he tried to kill you and all." Naruto gave a shrug. His voice trailed off as he said, "He wasn't always like that. There was a time when." Sukiya gave him a gentle look. "It was a long time ago, back when all of us were 12, newly graduated genin. We went on a couple dangerous missions together, which really helped us grow on the other. Or so I thought. About a year later, this guy, Orochimaru, showed up during the second part of our Chunin exams. He gave Sasuke a curse mark, which at certain points, gave him an extraordinary amount of extra strength and power." Naruto revealed, his voice growing weaker. It was only a couple months afterwards that he ran away from the village, heading towards Orochimaru because he wanted power, of which the man had promised. Silently, the other Jinchuriki awaited the blonde's next statement. But Raya spoke up after walking silently for a few minutes. The girl said, "So, did you go after him?" Naruto nodded solemnly as his eyes grew a little dimmer. His words were hardly audible above a whisper. "Kiba, Neji, Choji, Shikamaru, and I chased him half-way to Otto, but I was flying solo by the time we finally met. It was at the Valley of the End," I said. Sakura took over the task of completing the story after he stopped. Naruto and Sasuke fought long and hard, but it wasn't any use. Sasuke had gone too far into the darkness, and his heart had been sold. Naruto used all his strength and even asked Kyuubi for his assistance. But Naruto has a kinder heart and he didn't want to kill Sasuke. But I guess 3 years can change a person. Back then, Sasuke didn't want harm to come to Naruto either. But now, I'm not so sure, Sakura said. Kato's forehead furrowed in perplexity. "But why?" "By the sound of things, it'd be better if he was dead," he said. Naruto let out a sigh. Sasuke was deceived because of something his brother did to him when he was little. Itachi killed his entire family, including his parents. And then Itachi left, leaving Sasuke to fend for himself and with no explanation for what he had done other than, I wanted to test my strength. So Sasuke grew up, swearing to kill Itachi and revive his clan. He became an Avenger. It was his dream, his goal, his purpose in life. He trained hard, detached himself from all others to focus only on this, and he grew strong. When I met him, he was the apple of everyone's eye, the village's favorite, even though he never wanted to be. As the outcast, I immediately saw him as a rival, driving me to train my ass off day after day. Soon, I got close to his level, though he saw it a different way. If the dead last shinobi was close to par with him, then what has he been doing? This thought forced him to Orochimaru, searching for a great power that the snake had promised him. Murmured Naruto, his sapphire eyes filled with sorrow. Ryu remarked, but, if he's a rival, I'm lost. Naruto nearly grinned. As Jinchuriki, you understand that as children, we're shunned, outcasts, unwanted, hated even. When we gain friends, we hold them close, because if you take them away, what do we really have? Sasuke was one of these important people to me. He was a rival, yes, but that only pushed me to become better, stronger. While he moved forward at a rapid pace, he would always put me down, but that only fueled me to become who I am. He's who I thought a brother would be. That's why I dropped the attack and took the hit. Even if he has lost all bonds with us, I haven't. If he wants to kill me now, so be it. I don't. Enlightened. The other shinobi remained silent as they processed what their blonde comrade had just said. Kato finally broke the somewhat awkward silence that had pervaded the room by saying, I don't see your point, but that doesn't mean that you're wrong. Naruto grinned. I guess, you had to know him. The big city towered over the group as they reached the gates of Kusa. In contrast to AIM, their front door was unguarded. In fact, it was open, like a relative's arms waiting to welcome a child. Reyes smiled and said, well, they certainly aren't afraid of enemy attack. Sakura gave a shrug. The pink-haired medic replied, Kusa has a lot of talented shinobi. I guess with all that power, there's nothing to worry about. After inhaling deeply, Naruto resumed his stride and made his way to the next team member. But throughout it all, he was thinking uneasy thoughts. What if she didn't want to? When would their luck run out? Even though a few of the others had been as well, there was a good chance that the others had changed their minds and that they had been sought after by the others. Would that last, though? Would the 9 Jinchuriki even be reached with 4 more to go? Those depressing thoughts made the blonde shake himself. He needed to think freely and surround himself with positive people. His actions on the outside would surely reveal his feelings. The square was as crowded as a sardine pack, and the streets were teeming with people. In the seemingly tiny streets of Kusa, the capital of the grass country, vendors, stands, and customers are all humming together. The only thing the shinobi could do for a few minutes was stand there, gaping, soaking up the colors, the excitement, the celebration. It was wonderful. A passerby, who just so happened to be carrying an armful of boxes, was stopped by Sukiya as she broke away from the breathtaking sights. The green-haired girl said, pardon me. Do you know where we could find, Gobi's Jinchuriki? The man nodded as the weight in his hands began to make his arms tremble. He gestured with his head in the direction he had just come from and said, I think I saw her in the square just a few minutes ago. Head in that direction for about a minute and a half. Really big opening, hard to miss. She's got brown hair, blonde highlights, brown eyes. Tall and slender. Sukiya nodded gratefully and smiled broadly. With triumphant eyes, she went back to her friends. Just start walking that way. She's somewhere in the square. Brown and blonde hair. Brown eyes. Tall, slender, and probably, well, you know. Kinda like how we live our lives. Said the child. Sakura gave a nod, and Naruto vanished silently into the throng, his figure swiftly blending in with the multitude of bodies. The square of Kusa. Everyone had been split up by the commotion of the people squeezing through, but eventually the remaining ninja reunited. First to arrive, Naruto looked around the vast clearing until the others arrived. Kato, the last to arrive, said, so, any luck? Naruto gave a shrug. The blonde's ocean blue eyes continued to search the two. There are a lot of girls that could match the description Sukiya got. But, I haven't exactly found someone that would seem like a Jinchuriki. Their focus was diverted by a loud commotion to their immediate right. They saw a big group of people standing in a circle, with 2 invisible individuals in the center. Naruto approached the group inquisitively, with his allies following closely behind. To his dismay, there were too many taller people in the front, despite the team's best efforts to see over their heads. The person you were looking for is surrounded by people who are protecting the weak. At the sudden sound of his voice, Naruto flinched. As usual, he asked himself in his head. What? Unsurprisingly, however, the voice remained silent and offered no response to the enigmatic puzzle he had just been given. Consider Naruto. You understand. Naruto clenched his jaw as he thought deeply and snarled under his breath. That would be Gobi's Jinchuriki, if you're looking for it. But with lots of people around. What kind of Jinchuriki would have people all around it? However, the voice never mentioned that they were surrounded in a positive way. Is there a crowd out to harm them? But why would he say that the weak should be protected? His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a chant that stood out from the background noise. Fight, fight, fight. The circle was the source of it. Naruto's eyes went wide. Was that all there was to it? Ignoring the glares and curses directed at him, the teenager jumped into the crowd and pushed his way to the front. He saw what was happening after crashing through the body barrier. 3 boys who appeared to be around their age, if not slightly older, stood in the middle of the circle. A girl stood on the opposite side, her posture firm, her eyes hard. 2 young children, a girl and a boy, who were twins, cowered behind her. The boy's bright blue eyes were both innocent and scared as he held a small puppy against his chest. The girl's dark blonde hair hung over her eyes, and her sparkling blues were filled with fear. She looked exactly the same. The tall girl who was standing up for them was just a few inches shorter than Naruto. She had the ideal figure, slim but not too thin. Her hair was cut to fall just above her shoulder blades, with bright blonde highlights mixed in with a deep chestnut brown base color. Her deep, dark brown eyes, which were the color of creamy chocolate, conveyed exactly how she was feeling. At the moment, their anger and defense were evident, and their anger was piercing. Just back off, you 3. Leave them alone, the girl sarcastically said, addressing the boys across from her. She spoke in a mid-pitched voice that was neither too high nor too low. The teenager who was clearly in charge grinned. He crooned, his smile mischievous, and not in a good way. Hey, we were just playing with them. Now, come on, let us see your pretty little dog. The young boy angrily shook his head. No, you're just going to hurt him. You've already tried before, he said. A boy with a burly build emerged from behind his leader and began loudly cracking his knuckles. His voice was a bit too low for a boy his age as he threatened. I suggest you give us the dog, now. The brunette girl looked directly into the burly teen's eyes while crossing her arms. She whispered, too softly for most people to hear, freeze. The boy's eyes grew wide, and he abruptly halted his advance, leaving his foot hanging in midair. A stern frown replaced his leader's smile. Move, you big idiot. Get the dog and take down that little girl, he said. However, his friend merely let out a cry, his loud voice resonating throughout the city. He tried to move his arms while his eyes were wide with panic. I can't move. She did something to me, he cried. The girl grinned and exuded confidence. She said, more loudly, release. The boy's legs crumpled under him as he fell in a flash. Fearfully, the leader and the other boy retreated a step. The first boy yelled, L. Let's get out of here, before spinning around and leaving. Without hurrying, the 2 others followed his lead and left the area right away. Only the girl and the twins remained after the crowd dispersed with a few complaints of disappointment. Her smile was now warm and kind as she turned and bowed to their level. After she said a few unheard words, the 2 kids nodded and ran to a nearby house, where they vanished through the door. Naruto used this as an opportunity to go up to the girl. As soon as he moved forward, she instantly raised her glistening brown eyes once more. What? She inquired in a wary tone. Naruto grinned. He said, Gobi's Jinchuriki? She scowled. Sarcastically, she said, and if I am? Naruto grinned. You're a wanted man. The girl was trained in the art of suspicion, and her senses immediately went into overdrive as her eyes narrowed. She folded her arms across her chest and said, Care to explain? Naruto nodded and gave a gentle smile. My name is Naruto Uzumaki and I was once the holder of the 9-tailed fox, Kyuubi. There's Sukiya with the Sanbi, Kato with the Yanbi, Gaara with the Shukaku and Ryu with the Nibi. And this is Sakura, a friend from home. We're traveling across the great nations, hunting down all former Jinchuriki and asking them to join our resistance. Our job is to take down the Akatsuki and eventually gain our Biju back. And you're on our list. Naruto clarified, keeping it as brief as possible. The host of the Gobi moved her jaw, which was likely an indication that she was thinking. My name is Mayuri, former holder of the Gobi. I actually loved her, she was like a pet to me. Yet, there's a lot more things that could over. Rule that, you're going to have to let me think about it first. Mayuri answered in a quiet, contemplative voice, her mind already in motion. Naruto grinned. With an apologetic expression, the blonde teenager continued, I know it's a lot to think about. We'll meet up here tomorrow, unfortunately, that's the latest we can wait. Mayuri turned and nodded absently, heading across the square to a dim alleyway. Naruto exhaled a sigh of calm. He tilted his head to the left and looked at the other members of his group. Come on. I saw a hotel over that way, he replied. Hotel. A door connected the two suites they had purchased, one for the boys and one for the girls. Just after 9 o'clock in the evening, everyone was gathered in the boys' suite, engaging in a variety of haphazard activities. Sukiya and Raya were engaged in a game of chess that pitted skill against intelligence. Sakura was testing out a technique she was reading about in a medical book, her hands flashing with chakra flares every so often. Unable to locate the remote control, Kato and Gaara were sitting by the TV and using a stick to switch between channels. Naruto was seated by the window, observing the passing people and the illumination of the bars as the patrons emerged. With a heavy sigh, he put his head on his knees, drawing Sakura's attention to the gesture. She left the book on the bed and went to sit on the sill beside him. Sakura knew him well enough to know that something was bothering him, so he looked up and gave a feeble smile. She asked softly, so as not to disturb anyone else, "What's up?" Naruto shrugged and turned to face the window again, his gaze trailing an inebriated couple as they sang an off-key polka. Sakura touched his arm tenderly and gazed intently into his blue eyes, seeking a reason. The girl asked, "You're worried, aren't you?" But the response was fairly clear. The blonde gave a serious nod. What if our luck ends here? What if she refuses and then everything goes downhill from there? How am I supposed to lead something like that? Putting all your lives in danger? He replied softly. Sakura gave a pitying smile. I don't think that'll happen. You heard her earlier, she loved the gobi. Chances are really high in our favor right now, probably higher than ever before. Trust that it'll be okay, she replied. Naruto didn't seem to be convinced. With amusing eyes, Kato said, Whoa, sorry, we didn't know that we'd be interrupting something. Sakura's hand caught the attention of both Sapphire and Emerald eyes, and the girl quickly withdrew. After smirking, the Yonbi Jinchuriki saw the look in the blonde's eyes. His smile was gone in an instant, replaced by concern. What's going on? She clarified, he's worried about the outcome of this whole thing. With a nod, Kato took a seat on the bed's edge. Don't kill yourself so much. She's pretty much in the bag already. I'm sure that she'll be there tomorrow morning with the positive answer, he reassured. Naruto let out a sigh. But it's actually outstanding that our luck has lasted this long. It makes me wonder, when is it finally gonna run out? Which makes me fear for your lives. Chances of survival in a mishap, not looking too great. Naruto murmured. I think it's only going to get worse. Looking up from her game, Raya said, that's not entirely true. With our group expanding so quickly, our chances are doubling faster than the Akatsuki can track it. But it took a lot of work just to get the group it is today. Convincing, major cross. Country travel, prison breaks, fights, running. It's a lot on a person's shoulders, replied Naruto. As she continued to flip through the programs with the piece of bed. Post, Gaara added, yes, it can be exhausting. And sure, some may be a little skeptical about taking back their Biju. Take me for example. But I'm also here and standing with you 100%. I know we'll get through this. Naruto nodded, but his expression remained uncertain. To make matters higher, with all of us already in the group, it makes the thing look a lot more convincing. If it was just two of you, like when you first started out, chances were lower. Now that we're building some backbone, the others will feel more compelled to do it. Raya said shrewdly, knocking at the game board. The holder of the Sanbi grimaced. Naruto muttered, that's the key word. Could. With a triumphant smile, Sukiya removed a knight from the board and replaced it with her tower. They're right, Naruto. You need to have more confidence in yourself. Not only is the number of people enough to convince people, your stature, your words, they really make you think. I refused, but yet here I am, running along with you guys. It's not because of the numbers, it was only 3 of you when you knocked on my door. It was because I knew your intentions were true, inspiring me to go along. The young woman with green hair threw herself to the queen who was on the other side. You make us all feel stronger, Naruto. The aura around you is staggering. Even if we're feeling down, you keep us going, but not when you're like this. Sakura encouraged, her grin making a joke. Naruto grinned. You're a great leader, and even if we're stuck like this when we take the Akatsuki on, we won't think differently. Naruto's dazzling grin widened to dangerous proportions. Thanks. Later that evening, Sukiya and Raya had already retired to their suite and were more than prepared to spend the night there. Kato and Gaara, who had grown tired of foreign dancing shows and soap operas, had also fallen asleep. Sakura and Naruto were the only ones left. The medic was back reading, and Naruto was hanging off the couch, using the stick to poke the up, down buttons on the channel. With a sigh, he tossed the object over his shoulder, and the wood fragment fell into the chair next to the blonde. With his gaze fixed on the action film, he whispered, "We really need to find that remote." Sakura grinned as she looked up. Her jade eyes danced as she said, "Can't you just get up and change it with your fingers?" Naruto grinned. He responded, "What a waste of perfectly good technology, if I could freaking find it first," which made the girl with the pink hair laugh. Once more, they sat in silence, with only the TV making noise. About 10 minutes later, the film reached a point that really captured Naruto's interest. Ishiko, the protagonist, was pursuing Nero, his best friend. Apparently, Nero had completely forgotten about the friends he would be leaving behind when he left to find something outside of his hometown. Kara, a girl who had a serious crush on Nero, longed for him to return. Ishiko promised her that he would win her back because he loved nothing more than to see her happy, even if it meant sacrificing his feelings and dreams to win her approval. Sakura and Naruto watched with great interest as Nero and Ishiko engaged in combat in a vast clearing, their hearts aching each time they discovered another parallel between the film and their own experiences. Ishiko battled Nero valiantly, refusing to back down from any blow. Despite having the opportunity numerous times, he never attempted to kill Nero. Ishiko responded to Nero's question by saying that he cared for him too much and that he had vowed to return the favor. Seeing that his attack would override Nero's and kill him, Ishiko dropped his defenses the next time he and Nero charged. But he took a sword to the heart to pay for that. The location where Sasuke's Chidori struck his right lung all those years ago was where Naruto's hand went. Even though the scar was now only a thin pink line, he would occasionally get a shock and recall the precise person who had caused that potentially fatal wound. Ishiko's injuries caused his death on the battlefield. Nero was about to flee when he was apprehended by a town elder and brought back to the city. All of Ishiko's closest family members attended his small funeral after he was picked up later. 2 of them, that is. A scene of Nero and Kara somewhere in a park marked the film's conclusion. He promised to stay in the town with Kara after she told him about her feelings. They were married a few years later, and they were expecting their first son, Ishiko. The two could only sit there and stare at the screen as the movie's credits began to roll. Naruto was simply in awe, and Sakura was fighting back tears. When the movie emerged with a stilled image of Ishiko's grave, the blonde was the first to move. He grabbed the stick again and flipped to a Spanish soap opera. He would much rather watch 2 sisters quarreling over an ex-boyfriend in a language he didn't understand than find out what would happen next. Naruto said softly, "Well, the screen play was interesting." Sakura put the book on the bed and sat motionless, gazing absently at the screen. Naruto let out a quiet sigh. "I still intend to keep my promise to you, don't worry," he replied. Sakura's eyes widened as she looked over. "What?" she inquired. With resolute blue eyes, the blonde reiterated, "I'll get him back. I promised that I wouldn't die until he was back." Sakura quietly rose from the bed and moved to Naruto's seat, settling into a chair across from the couch where Naruto was lying. She said in a whisper, "No." Naruto looked at her bewilderedly. "What are you talking about?" "Of course I will. It's a promise of a lifetime. I swore it. I'll never go back on my word, don't worry Sakura," the teenager replied. Sakura argued by shaking her head. Her voice became louder as she muttered, "No, I don't want you to go after him anymore." With his eyes focused, Naruto swung himself upright into a sitting position. "Why not?" asked the boy. Sakura wiped his eyes, tears welling up but being forced back. She explained, "You saw that movie, it was so much like our lives it's scary." She was surprised that the blonde hadn't seen it. "I was Kara. Sasuke was Nero, and you were Ishiko." Naruto scowled. Silently, Naruto answered, "Yeah, I know." His gaze was fixed on the table before him as he reclined in the couch. "That doesn't mean I should stop." "Yeah, you should. Naruto, I don't want life to end up like it did in that movie. If you died, I'd be lost." Sakura responded. Naruto gave a pitiful smile. Sakura looked surprised as the blonde whispered, "But if I died and Sasuke came home, everything would be fine, like the movie." She gave him a firm but not particularly hard punch to the arm. "Do you really believe that? I mean, sure, when he left it hurt, it still does. But if you were to die, that would be a void that would never be filled. no matter if Sasuke came back or not. Naruto, all he is, he's a friend to me. I got over that crush a while ago. But please, don't throw your life away for him, it would hurt too much. Sakura begged, her forest green gaze searching. For a few seconds, Naruto looked into her eyes and gave her a small smile. He said, okay, but it was clear he wasn't going to give up so easily. With a small smile, Sakura got up and moved to where he was seated. She broke Naruto out of his reverie and into a, whoa, what just happened? Dazed by leaning over and giving him a gentle peck on the cheek. Grinning, she backed away into the girls' suite and opened the door beside the couch. When the door closed, the blonde was still stunned and the only sound was that of yelling women and an ex-boyfriend who was somehow caught up in the altercation. The teenager was only awakened by a gentle but urgent knock on the window. In a flash, his eyes were filled with confusion. Who in the world could be at his window at 10 o'clock at night? A brunette, blonde was crouched on a gargoyle close to the window when he approached and threw the pane open. Breathing heavily, Mayuri swung in and landed with a gentle thud. "What's up, Mayuri?" inquired Naruto, perplexed. The girl had just finished a wind-breaking run over here when she turned her hair slightly out of place. She said, "I came to tell you my answer, yay." Naruto grinned. In that instant, he felt as though a heavy burden had been removed. "But there's more. I'm being followed by Kisame." "Oh no, it's returned." Naruto's body turned to stone as he instantly froze. He had vivid memories of Kisame. They had met numerous times, all in extremely unfavorable circumstances. When he was younger, he stayed in a hotel and went on the road a few times with Jiraiya. However, things didn't work out as planned. His mind then turned to Itachi, the fishman's partner, because Sasuke would typically be where Itachi was. He never knew, though, and it was possible that Sasuke and Itachi had partnered for some strange reason. And this would undoubtedly be an intriguing battle if Itachi showed up with Kisame as he usually did. Depending on what Biju they were carrying, Naruto was certain he could possibly take one of them. The sound of screams coming from up the street, followed by the shattering screech of glass breaking, snapped him out of his reverie. Mayuri and Naruto looked at each other, their eyes speaking for them. He was closer than they had initially believed. With a deft flip of the couch and chair, the blonde wheeled around and landed silently at the door between the girls' room and the living area. With the heavy wooden blockade thudding dully shut, Mayuri was already sliding through the boy's door. With his eyes searching the room for the shinobi he sought, the teenager rushed into the room, his hand never leaving the door handle. Immediately, a voice murmuring, "Naruto, what are you doing?" rose from the bed closest to the wall on the opposite side. With a half-sigh, Naruto hurried to Sakura's bed and silently leapt over the dozing Raya. He was momentarily taken aback by what he saw. Sakura sat against the headboard, her gentle emerald eyes glimmering with curiosity. She had her hair pulled back in a low ponytail and was dressed in light gray sweatpants and a subtle pink tank top. The metal of the Kanaha headband, which was loosely tied around her neck, glinted a little in the light from the living room lamp. After a few seconds of standing and staring, the blonde was startled awake by another loud smash, which brought up the issue again. He said gravely, "You need to wake up. Kisame has discovered us." Sakura's eyes suddenly widened and she looked at him, both of them focused on the same dim hope. "Do you think?" Naruto responded, already approaching the green-haired girl's side. "I don't know. But we'll just have to find out. Get Raya. I got Sukiya." Sakura hurriedly threw back the covers and clambered out of the warm hotel bed. She gave the blonde girl a gentle but firm shoulder shake. However, the former Jinchuriki didn't even recoil at the action. She continued to sleep as though she was incapable of feeling anything. Gazing at her teammate, Sakura said, Raya, damn it, what's wrong with her?" The boy's only option was to shrug. "I dunno, Sukiya's not budging either. What the hell is going on? It's like they can't hear us or something," he said. Mayuri was now submerged in the doorway, her face agitated. She sobbed, her chocolate brown eyes racing, already looking for an explanation. "I can't get Kato or Gaara to get up. They didn't even react. I tried everything." The room echoed with a deep laugh, ominous and full of excitement. When Sakura saw Kisame suddenly appear next to the blonde, his hand on his hilt, she had to suppress a scream. With a swift and nearly imperceptible motion, he delivered a forceful blow to Naruto. The teenager realized at the last second and barely avoided the blow by ducking down. The plaster crumbled, a hole appeared beneath his hand, and the mist shinobi's fist struck the wall behind him. His smile was full of shark teeth that resembled daggers. His grip tightened as he yanked his fist back to the handle of his sword after yanking it violently out of the now demolished wall. Growling, he charged once more, saying, "You won't be so lucky next time." Naruto stepped back, preparing himself. Kisame kicked out a foot, and Naruto's open hand caught the kick exactly. The blonde let out a grunt, his breath catching as the blow struck him squarely in the middle of his chest. But he was unable to stop. Twisting around and tensing his muscles, he threw the man against the wall. Better yet, threw it. The fish dot man crashed into the streets below after smashing through the white wall. Naruto sprinted out of the wide opening and leapt to the ground, prepared to confront his opponent when he stood up. When Sakura and Mayuri arrived at the ragged exit the teen below had made, the pinkette stopped following him. She muttered, "This'll be hard to explain," before swiftly getting back to the topic at hand. The boy smiled at each of them as they landed on either side of him. Kisame grinned back as he pulled himself up off the ground. He put his hand on his knee and cackled, well, where did that delicious source of power come from?" He said nothing, and Naruto remained motionless. Knowing that his time would come, he simply waited patiently. As soon as Kisame realized this, his smile vanished. He pulled out his bandaged blade and attacked silently. He headed directly for the blonde teenager, passing Mayuri and Sakura in the process. Flipping away, he landed parallel to the wall behind him before launching himself at the man who was hurrying. Naruto moved during his flight so he could strike the ridged weapon with his feet as Kisame raised the sword. The spikes dug into the soles of his shoes as he struck it hard. Despite a slight flinch, Naruto persisted in his attack. Kicking off, he twisted over his head and landed right behind the tall man. Though the blow did now cause damage, the blonde jabbed in. He swiftly moved around him, throwing these same blows in many different locations. With a sly smile, Kisame knocked the boy away with a single blow to his blade. Naruto landed in a heap after skidding across the stone streets, his bones rattling from the startling impact. Sakura and Mayuri nodded and launched a coordinated attack, Sakura leaning slightly back and Mayuri taking the lead. With remarkable speed, the brunette launched a frontal assault. She was present for a split second before abruptly disappearing. Catching a head dive, she reappeared slightly above him. With his sword raised, Kisame prepared to tear her to pieces. However, she vanished once more, this time running behind him, before it could make contact. She wanted to knock him off his feet, so she aimed a swipe at his feet. She managed to knock him off balance, if only slightly, it was sufficient. She kicked him in the side, sending him crashing to the ground as he struggled to stand up again. She spun around and pushed his sword across the street with the side of her foot, causing the metal to spark and scream as she did so. Kisame growled as he pulled himself up out of the dirt. The girl danced away, her steps light and skillful, but he grabbed at her foot. With a growl, the fish man flung his body skyward and ran after her. With a series of punches, he pushed her back. She avoided or blocked each one, keeping a close eye on him. She would occasionally look at his feet, but she would never be away from them for very long. She stumbled over something behind her and fell to the ground, her head slamming into the floor with a thud that reverberated painfully throughout the room. She stumbled over his sword, which Kisame retrieved with a smirk and slung over his shoulder. The girl was slowly rising, her hand on the back of her head, and he smiled down at her smugly. He returned his blade to strike the Gobi girl one last time and said, "I'll admit, you had me there for a minute, but the weak always come out on top, no matter how lucky you are." The rumbling of the ground, however, briefly diverted his attention. Both looked at the ground, perplexed. Earthquake? The ground shattered beneath his feet in an instant, revealing a chasm beneath them. He extended his hand in search of something to keep him from falling into the chasm. Unfortunately for him, though, his hand only touched air. He fell sharply into the hole, perhaps 7 feet below the surface. Sakura's black-clad fist was hammered on the ground with a smile on her face as Mayuri followed the tiny crack coming from the hole. As waves of swirling power erupted from the crevice, Kisame let out an indignant scream from the bottom of the shadows. With a hint of ocean scent, the air grew stronger and stronger. He was caring for the Sanbi with him, and the two girls' eyes widened. Water began to squirt out of the ground's fissures as if at the exact moment, moving quickly in the direction of the pinkette who was crouched. Sakura gave a little gasp and rolled away in time to see Kisame explode through the earth where she had been moments before. Even though he was drenched, he didn't appear to mind at all. The white needles glowed in the darkness as he exposed his teeth. Though he didn't have to, he chose not to speak. The air around him, his eyes, and his size all conveyed the same message: murderous intent. Recharged by the demon's power, he charged, slapping his blade down with tremendous force. The odd blade embedded itself just inches from Sakura's face as she rolled away. He quickly withdrew and then swung sideways in an attempt to surprise her. It was effective, but she was fast enough to push off the ground and move to the other side as it went harmlessly beneath her body. By this point, the fish man was really angry and wanted blood, and he wanted it now. The girl did a backflip as he attempted an uppercut, but he continued. She was in mid-air when he abruptly changed course and gave her a hard side knock. Despite having bandages covering the sharp edges, it was not very safe from cutting into someone's flesh. It sent her sprawling to the ground, shredding a good chunk of her left side. She abruptly stopped her full-fledged fall and swung a short distance away. Her wound, however, cut her short. She was already losing blood fairly quickly, with the red fluid dripping onto the streets. The girl clenched her jaw. She needed to continue. She had gone too far to turn back now, and she would never again be the weak link in a group. No, even if it meant her death, she would continue to fight. Kisame thought that was a great idea. He struck again, but Sakura was able to avoid this one with ease. Back on par with the man, she danced away on her knees before swinging up into a standing position once more. Kisame threw a handful of kunai with a sly smile and lightning speed. She didn't even see him move. The gleam of moonlight off the metal was the only visual clue. 3 of the 4 were blocked by the girl, but the 4th, which was clearly enhanced by chakra, buried its tip deep into her shoulder. Sakura took a quick look at the weapon and started to take it off. However, Kisame seized the chance. Even though she had only glanced away for a moment, he was standing beside her, launching punches that the shinobi could hardly stop at this point. She dodged sideways at the last second, avoiding an uppercut that would have instantly killed her. Knowing that she couldn't rest for long, she tried to move again but discovered that she couldn't. The blood loss and prolonged movement following such a wound had left her weak in a short amount of time. For what he knew would be his last blow, Kisame moved in. He extended his arm dramatically, prolonging the moment and relishing the sense of homelessness he recognized in his victim's eyes. Out of nowhere, Naruto knocked the defenseless girl aside while simultaneously raising his arm in a single gesture. Release. His shout was followed by a string of explosions, all coming from Kisame's body. Paper bombs that had been placed so appropriately started to explode into flaming eruptions all around his figure. The Akatsuki member lit up like a giant firecracker, drowning out the man's cries of pain with flashes of gunpowder. Sakura and Naruto rolled out of range and stopped close to Mayuri, who was cocked her head and watching the mist man with interest. With her eyes fixed on the fire show 100 meters away, she whispered, "How'd he not notice that, the idiot?" With a shrug, Naruto assisted his teammate in getting up off the ground. As he observed Sakura tending to her wounds, he responded, too self-confident, didn't even notice. The man's screams had long since been muffled as the blasts of sound faded. Anything they could see, was obscured by the hazy smoke that enveloped the area in front of them. There was silence for a few seconds. Mayuri was the first to respond, letting out a little gasp as her eyes widened. A gust of wind blew from her hands as she gave them a forceful clap. Still smoking a little from the explosions a minute before, the billow of wind swirled away, exposing multiple holes in the stone pavement. However, the most crucial element, Kisame, was the only thing lacking. Only a small torn edge of paper remained, and the man had vanished completely. Naruto slowly got up and left the two by their sides. He walked to the spot where the slip was in the embers and knelt down to pick it up. This is just the beginning. The world will burn, and so will you and your loved ones. Squeezing his hand tightly and clenching his jaw, Naruto crumpled the paper into a tiny ball and tossed it into a corner's shadow. Bring it on, I'm ready. Kisame had disappeared without a trace despite the 3 of them searching a large radius around the hotel. It was well past midnight when they got back to the suite. San's morning hours would soon be upon them, signaling their departure. The rest of their group surrounded them as soon as they leapt through the huge hole in the wall, their faces displaying everything from suspicion to anxiety. Naruto said, "Oh, so now you wake up." He put a genjutsu on the wall to make it appear more authentic. Sukiya tilted her head, astonished. "What are you talking about?" There was a loud bang and we all woke up instantly. "You guys were gone and there was a huge hole in the wall," she replied, appearing perplexed. Mayuri sighed a few seconds after furrowing her brow in contemplation. "He must have placed a sleeping jutsu on all of you. He was probably trying to get you all under his spell but didn't know that 2 of you were still awake," she concluded. Naruto scowled. The blonde questioned, "How do you figure that?" The brunette gave a quiet smile. "Well, it's really a simple matter of intellectual deciphering the subject. the fact that everyone else was locked in an unawake-able slumber until the enemy vanished, releasing them from the intricately woven plan. She clarified. All Naruto did was blink. Come again. Sakura translated, laughing. She means he cast a jutsu so that Mayuri wouldn't be able to find any help, but luckily, we were still awake. The teenager turned back to their newest recruit after mouthing the word, "Oh." Smiling, he said, "You're smart, I like that." The girl's eyes glowed amiably as she returned the smile. So, what the hell was the explosion that shook us from Kisami's trap? Kato asked. Naruto gave a shrug. I dunno, maybe all the explosive notes that were placed on his body. He was throwing out. Mayuri nodded once more in agreement. Once his concentration was blown, he probably couldn't focus his chakra on the jutsu anymore. So they woke up only seconds after you lit off the first seal, said the shinobi. Gaara's eyebrows went up. He looked curiously at the blonde teenager and said, "Explosive seals?" Naruto grinned. I didn't really know what else to do. I mean, how do you beat a guy that's enhanced with a biju? He laughed. The seals were actually wonderfully placed. They were around the main arteries and vital organs. How do you figure that in a matter of seconds? Sakura inquired. In response, Naruto merely grinned. Well, however he did it. I don't think he'll be bothering us for a while, Raya said. Naruto started laughing at this point. The only expression on the faces of the 6 ninja was one of question. Kato inquired, "What's up with you?" Naruto took a deep breath and grinned broadly. His voice was filled with laughter as he said, "Something tells me that he'll be back sooner than we think." Mayuri asked, "How do you see that?" Let's just say, he's screwed if he ever wants to have kids. They never really went back to sleep, instead chatting together until the first rays of light came in through the large paneled windows. Dawn had arrived rather quickly. 45 minutes later, they were crammed in entering the village, the excitement of being on the road again swiftly overpowering their slight fatigue. They were going to Taki, the hidden waterfall village, where Jiraiya had mentioned that there was another Jinchuriki living there. As they moved farther away from the swampy and desert regions, the land became more verdant and lush under the bright sun. Plains were more prevalent, with clear, sparkling lakes appearing every half hour and sporadic patches of dense forest emerging on the countryside. As they walked, everyone's mood only got better, with the upbeat surroundings fostering feelings of confidence and laughter. Mayuri frequently stopped during her stroll to observe the activities of the surrounding animals, her chocolate brown eyes giddy with joy. The shinobi soon discovered that she loved all animals and wished to continue her research on them. She envisioned learning how ninja could add their qualities, such as the ability to fly, to go beyond their image. Gaara and Raya were talking about a variety of topics, from their past to their future plans. As it turned out, they shared a lot of personality traits. Before you got to know them, they both seemed like scary individuals who were more of a loner. As strange as that sounds, they could actually open up and become warm, friendly shinobi once they got to know other people. Despite their very different biju, Kato and Sukiya had become close friends over the past few days and were really clicking. When you think about it, the idea of the fire type and the water type working together is definitely strange. It was a scene that could only be shared by people who were similar to one another. They laughed as though they had known one another for years. Finally, despite not even realizing their proximity to one another, Naruto and Sakura took the lead. As she read about uncommon poisons and their improbable remedies, Sakura's head was deep in a medical journal, her brow furrowed in concentration. Surprisingly, Naruto was using the scroll Kakashi had given him before he left to read carefully about a high-class jutsu. He found it fascinating how much chakra capacity was required to maintain the attack for just a few seconds and how much power needed to be condensed, otherwise it would lash out and destroy everything within 10 miles. Thud. The 2 Konoha ninja looked up to see what they had collided with. When Emerald and Cerulean met, they both flinched. Naruto flashed his brilliant grin. He took a step back and began to walk again, blushing slightly as he said, "Sorry, I was absorbed in this jutsu instructions." Sakura's cheeks turned a similar shade of soft pink, but she covered it up with her giggles. "No problem, I was just reading this medic's journal to some ancient remedies that have been lost for thousands of years," she said. Glancing over her shoulder to see the page she was on, Naruto grinned once more. His words were a jumbled mess as he asked, "Paralysis diacoxacomi stellophyx?" The doctor laughed. The girl looked at her blonde friend and said, "It's a leaf that causes paralysis of the organs inside your body. The poison attacks the main arteries and shuts them down slowly. It's actually a very painful process." He arched an eyebrow. He retreated and remarked, "I'd hate to be the guy they tested that one on." A tiny smile appeared on Sakura's face as she rolled her eyes. She gave the scroll in his hand a nod. "And what about you? What kind of jutsu did Kakashi-sensei hand you?" she inquired. His eyes lit up like a child receiving a brand new toy as he said, "Oh, it's incredible. There isn't really an element to it, it's kind of a combination between all of them. It takes an astonishing amount of power just to get it jump started, and you have to keep a constant focus on it, otherwise it will explode, ultimately gravely wounding the person using it." Sakura chuckled to himself because he was always thrilled to learn something new because it meant he was getting closer to his dream. With her jade eyes sparkling, she asked jokingly, "Is this jutsu going to push you over the top for the title Hokage?" Naruto's eyes dropped to the floor and his smile instantly wavered. However, it was soon replaced by a gentle smile. In response, he muttered, "Yeah, maybe." However, he was aware that the dream had become unclear. They had no trouble entering Taki. All they needed to do was persuade someone to let them in. Fortunately, they had been cautioned by the guards to avoid a specific location, or more specifically, a specific residence. They immediately recognized the former Jinchuriki they had forewarned them about. If only they were aware. They could feel the looks piercing their backs as they walked over. Given their stark differences, origins, and other characteristics, they were obviously visually striking. In actuality, however, they were most likely more alike than blood relatives. Area prohibited. They were aware that there had been a quarantine sign close to the start of this neighborhood. The boy they were searching for lived here. A figure landed in front of them and raised a defense as they were strolling down the street, searching the ghostly windows for any indication of human life. His voice was firm as he asked, "Who are you? Why are you here?" He was tall, roughly Naruto's height. He had fair silver hair that was streaked with black. He was separated from them by the serious, known look in his pale blue eyes. He maintained a professional demeanor without showing any signs of weakness. Naruto grinned. "Calm down, we're just like you." The boy's eyebrow went up. He whispered, "I bet, now, get out of here." He started to leave, but Naruto stopped him by grabbing his arm. Staring at the blonde who was holding him, the boy spun around. Naruto went on, "You don't even know what I have to say." The boy's forehead furrowed. He tore his arm from Naruto's hand and said, "I already know, you want me to join your Jinchuriki team and stop the Akatsuki, to take back my Biju. But as you can see, whether or not I have the demon, these people hate me. Maybe it'll get better without him, and I'm going to find out. So, no, now leave." The blonde did not attempt to stop him. He sighed. He hadn't been shocked, somehow. With a deflated look on his face, the blonde boy watched as the six-tailed container disappeared into the extending shadows. He turned to the others, gritting his teeth and swallowing the depression that was rising in his chest. He gave a feeble smile. He put his hands in his pockets and walked away, saying quietly, "Well, that's that, then, let's get going." After the group looked at each other, Sakura rushed to catch up to her teammate who was moving quickly. "Shouldn't we, I don't know, stay overnight, wait for him to think about it and show up on our doorstep?" asked Sakura. Naruto scowled. With his gaze fixed on the road ahead, he responded, "Nothing ever happens the same way twice." She threw out again, jogging to keep up with his long strides. "What about, hoping that he rethinks it and shows up with a grand gesture of friendship? It was bound to happen sometime. There's nothing we can do now but keep moving," he murmured. Desperate to keep him in one place, Sakura blurted, but, shouldn't we at least rest first?" Naruto gave a headshake. Even though it wasn't visible in his face, his voice betrayed his fatigue as he responded, "We've lost too much ground already. We need to keep moving if we plan on keeping a timely schedule. We'll camp later tonight and I'll keep watch if you guys get tired." With her mind racing for an explanation for the blonde Jinchuriki, Sakura paused and fumbled for words, but she came up empty. She blew the bangs out of her face with a loud exhale as her shoulders slumped. Her friends were just now catching up when she turned to look at them. Sakura sighed and ran a hand through her shoulder-length hair. She hurried to approach her comrades retreating back and said, "Come on, we'd better get moving." Yude. The streetlights couldn't pierce the deepening darkness as the teenager turned down a narrow alleyway. He scowled as he thought back to just a few minutes ago. In an attempt to defeat the Akatsuki and reclaim the demons they had been harboring for at least 16 years, more than half of the Jinchuriki had come looking for him. However, there had been a feeling of familiarity about those individuals that he had previously experienced. Naturally, like the others, the six-tailed one had died after being taken. But only a few weeks prior, he had woken up comfortably leaning against the trunk of a maple tree in the middle of a forest. He discovered that, although he had no idea how or why he had been raised from the dead. He soon discovered that his enhanced senses had returned, despite the fact that the six-tailed shinobi was no longer present in his body or mind. However, he was no longer able to use any of the amazing aura that the 9 cursed shinobi used as a trump card. He was able to locate them with his eyes blindfolded and his fingers pushed up his ears, but one of the abilities he had left was the ability to sense the spirit of someone he had previously met, someone he had imprinted into his mind. And he knew that even though he had never met any of those individuals before, he had at some point become attuned to their souls and that one of them was a friend. However, he was unable to identify a face or even a name that fit the feel. He squeezed his eyes and furrowed his brow. He checked for the buzzing feeling he always gets when he's close to the group of teenagers he ran into a little more than 30 minutes ago. Then he understood. Once more, the soft, warm light filled his heart and mind, and it was the only thing he could think about at the moment. It had been her, a girl he had known for a very long time and who immediately made him realize she was unique. She had been hiding behind another, a light, pink-haired kunoichi, so he hadn't initially noticed her. Odd, he muttered. Mayuri, the Jinchuriki group. With her gentle blue eyes glowing with laughter, Sukiya questioned, "And you're sure it was him?" Mayuri enthusiastically nodded her head. She jumped a little as she walked and exclaimed, "I know it was. I'd remember that face anywhere. His eyes. He was the boy I met 6 years ago, the one that saved me from drowning in the river." The guys were laughing loudly in front of the 4 girls, who were keeping their distance from the rest of the group because they didn't want to join in on the girly chat, as they called it. "So, you fell in trying to get the water jug back, and he rescued you just before you drowned?" Raya asked. Mayuri gave a nod. "I didn't know how to swim back then. I guess I just leaned over too far and just went in. It was all a blur of white water in the bottom of the river. I keep swallowing mouthful after mouthful of water, but no air. Finally, just as I thought I was going to die, a pair of hands caught my arm and pulled me out. The last thing I saw was his worried face hovering over me. I had inhaled so much of the river. I was placed in the hospital for more than 2 weeks. After they had pumped me clean, I woke up about 3 hours after I was originally signed it, and I found him sitting there, waiting." She whispered, a sorrowful gleam emerging in her eyes. "We talked for hours and he was there every minute of visiting hours until I was discharged. Then, I never saw him again. He disappeared that very same night." Raya touched her shoulder reassuringly. With an increasing smile, Sukiya squealed, "Then why didn't you talk to him back there?" Mayuri shrugged and gave a small smirk. "I was too shy. We've grown a lot and, well, let's face it, why would he remember me?" she replied. Sakura gave her a light arm punch. "Because you had him struck. If any boy is around for that long of a time without knowing you in the beginning, you've got him wrapped around your finger." She laughed. Mayuri blushed softly and lowered her head, walking a little more quickly. The 3 of them had a great time together, laughing heartily. They were discussing the best restaurants in their respective villages when Naruto abruptly stopped. The other 2 men staggered to their feet and spun around, looking bewildered. The blonde remained motionless as he tuned his ears to a distant sound. He was momentarily distracted by the fact that his sight and hearing seemed to be functioning better than normal, but the diversion was cut short when he heard the sound of wood hitting wood, a sound he regrettably knew all too well. In an instant, he turned and snatched a kunai from his holster, flinging the weapon just in time to stop the downward thrust of a remarkably familiar sword, its blade resembling a gigantic porcupine. After he landed, 2 more figures split up and ran in different directions, one toward the remaining guys and the other toward the girls in the back. With a grunt, Naruto looked up into his attacker's eyes. "You're going to pay for what you did to me, you little brat," Kisame roared, his eyes gleaming like a shark. With his art bombs in his hands, Deidara, meanwhile, ran quickly at the 4 girls following behind. He shouted, "Time to die," and threw a handful of tiny, deadly spiders. Yude. The boy woke up from his sleep with a splitting pain in his head. In a flash, he was on his feet, nearly toppling over the couch he had fallen asleep on. With his hand flying to his temples, he gave them a rough massage as the explosion from a few seconds earlier subsided. However, the panic that accompanied it only intensified, turning into a crippling fear that engulfed his entire being. He had no idea what had caused him to act in such a way, but whatever it was telling him to go north quickly. All of a sudden, he saw a picture of a dirt road with big pin trees all around it. Still smoking from some sort of attack, there was a huge gaping hole. Although he couldn't see who was fighting, he could hear the sounds of it in the distance. Then he saw something that stopped his heart in its tracks. Mayuri was picking herself up off the ground. Tufts of grass, dust, and dirt were visible in her hair. However, behind her, a long-haired blonde was coming down for a blow with a kunai made of some sort of paper, but he knew from his keen perceptions that it was a compressed version of mine that could move. With fluid movements, the blue-haired girl threw herself to the side, rolling into a ball and then flipping back to her feet. Once more, the man stabbed her with his unsteady weapon. She would be destroyed if he struck her, or at the very least seriously hurt and most likely irreparably. No matter the cost, he had to assist her. The instinct to protect was as strong as it had been when he had rescued her from the river all those years ago. Thus, he leapt from the window of his tiny apartment and began to run, his strong steps propelling him forward as he made his way quickly. Fight! Mayuri ducked beneath the swipe Deidara had aimed at her neck and skidded away once more. It was still too close, but the paper-match weapon whistled through the air safely above her head. With a sneer, Deidara swung down, his blow aimed straight at her bare back. The explosive hit the ground and exploded with a loud boom as the kunoichi rolled away. The team stopped mid-roll as a cloud of smoke rolled over the surrounding area, covering her head and sending pieces of the earth flying dangerously around her. She cautiously raised her head a few seconds later, her hair dripping with dirt. She looked around, but there was no sign of the Akatsuki member. She pushed herself into a crouch and released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, enjoying a well-earned nap. With another of his blades securely grasped in his hand, Deidara suddenly charged out of the blackened dust. He had a few minor burns all over him, but no other damage was apparent. Mayuri's eyes grew wide as she attempted to move but discovered that her feet were immobile. She glanced down and saw that the edges of her feet had a subtle aqua glow. She moaned to herself, realizing a bit too late that the blonde had used a powder to power the explosion, which, with a tiny pinch of his chakra, would have glued her feet to the ground and prevented her from moving. She sighed in frustration and looked back at the hurrying man. What a pitiful way to end things. Blow up by a man who makes little birds all day. However, a black streak struck his side before he could strike, sending the man flying and vanishing once more into the dense, choking rubble. Despite being stuck, Mayuri looked at the newcomer, eager to give it her all. She gasped, however, when the person turned. But she whispered, "It's you." With a sly smile, Yude approached her where she was crouching and lightly touched each of her feet, dissipating the chakra so she could move once more. After assisting her to stand, he squinted his eyes to see better through the haze. He said with a slight smile, "It looks like your friends are in a bit of trouble." Mayuri nodded and shook herself out of her awe. As she began to make her way through the smoke in the direction of the sounds of the fight, she replied, "We were attacked by some of the Akatsuki. I've seen two of them before, but the third one's new, the puppet user." Keeping a close watch for the Akatsuki, Yude trailed behind her. They saw an intriguing scene as they broke through the motionless billowing cloud. The fish clearly wanted to retaliate for the entire neutering process as Naruto and Kisame engaged in a 1-on-1 battle. The others were engaged in combat with a large number of puppets, and Sakura and Sasori were rematching. Despite the fact that she was flying alone, the odds were favorable this time. With gritted teeth, the blonde teenager shoved the fishman back a couple of inches. Sweat was forming on his forehead as he gasped, "You will not win, I won't let you." Kisame scowled as his eyes strayed to Sasori. Sakura staggered forward as her target disappeared into thin air as the redhead looked up, met his eye, and flashed up with a nod. "We'll be back, Naruto, we swear on it. Remember what I said, this isn't over." Kisame yelled. The blue Akatsuki flashed away in a swirl of water before Naruto could strike, leaving the Jinchuriki alone once more. Naruto's eyes widened and he rushed forward, his fist coming in fast. In a battle stance, Naruto stood motionless, breathing heavily. Then he turned slowly and wandered slowly toward the others. He paused, squinted, and then struck out with his fist, splintering the bark of the closest tree and making a sizable hole. His voice was frustrated as he muttered, "Got away again." With a sigh, he combed his spiky blonde hair and took a deep breath to gather himself. He looked at his teammates as he looked up. He looked from one person to the next and asked, "Everyone okay? Nobody hurt, right?" To which each person gave a negative response. When he finally reached Mayuri, he gave her a gentle smile. "That certainly was a number of impressive explosions, nice work." His protective, caring expression changed to one of confusion as his cerulean eyes fell on Yude. He asked out loud, without any anger, "You, what are you doing here?" With a sigh, Yude looked at the girl beside him, who smiled back at him encouragingly. With a determined expression on his face, the teenager returned the smile and turned back to Naruto. I'm here to join you in your fight against the Akatsuki. Only an hour or so had passed since nightfall, and the forested region of Demon Country was a somewhat gloomy and frightful place. However, a medium-sized campfire roaring away in a shallow pit kept the darkness and gloom at bay. Many people of various looks lounged in its warm, light glow, waiting for the first rays of the morning to arrive, indicating that it was time to move on. Naruto was leaning against a big maple tree on the outskirts of the fire, using his acute sense of hearing to listen for any enemies that might be approaching. He had noticed in the last few days that his eyesight and hearing were far superior to those of the average human, allowing him to detect minute details in objects that others would overlook. Only when he was in Kyuubi mode or when the fox gave it to him did he recall having such keen senses. However, the fox's absence made that difficult, and he had no idea where all of this was coming from. He wasn't alone, either. Kato had sneezed about a week ago after inadvertently breathing in some chili powder. No big deal, except that as he did, a burst of fire exploded from his nose, causing the poor old lady who was standing in front of them to have her shawl fringe. Not only that, but just a few hours later, Naruto had considered playing a practical joke on the boy with the raven hair by adding hot peppers to his food to test the height of his snot rocket flame. To his astonishment, however, Kato had leapt to his feet and cried, "Oh no, you're not." It turned out that Kato can detect when someone is thinking about something intensely and listen in on their thoughts as if they were having a conversation. All of the other former Jinchuriki appeared to be acquiring these new characteristics within a few days. Suddenly, Gaara can use his sand to control his appearance, making his disguises seem entirely real. In the dark, Raya can see every detail as clearly as she could in the light, and she has become so cunning that even Naruto, who has improved hearing, finds it difficult to detect her footsteps. Sukiya could now defend anyone nearby in a tiny bubble by creating a shield out of the water in the air. She could also stay underwater for a long time, which made it nearly impossible to play Marco Polo with her. Before they even met her, Mayuri had already developed one of her skills. She could momentarily take control of someone's thoughts and make them do anything she wanted. Her speech has a little more depth because her IQ has increased to a level Shikamaru would have been envious of. Yude's abilities had previously been assessed. With Earth as his primary element, he was a skilled fighter with developed special abilities that included scaling walls and tracking moving objects, such as insects or shinobi. A white-haired girl with deep brown eyes was their newest team member, and the tiny fangs sticking out of her mouth were a telltale sign that she was a Jinchuriki. Her name was Amiya, and she was a valuable member of their group due to her special ability to create and control Earth. She had been living alone since she was 6 when they discovered her in a tiny, abandoned village in the middle of the Demon Country. Years ago, a war had ripped her nation apart, essentially erasing the tiny piece of land from the map. Her village had lost its name altogether. After a few convincing words, she joined them even though she hadn't been particularly excited about the idea. They were therefore on their final recruit, who lived in Ocean Country, a collection of islands off the southern border of Fire Country. They all wanted to prolong this portion of the journey, so they were going a little slowly, and it would take them roughly 5 days to get there. Given that they were training while traveling and that they were almost finished assembling their team, the moment to face the Akatsuki was rapidly approaching. They knew it had to happen quickly. The Akatsuki had not been patiently waiting just because they were assembling a revolution team. Their crimes had really begun to increase in the last few days. The southern wind country had been completely destroyed by 3 of the Biju-wielding shinobi, nearly capturing Suna in the process. After learning of this, Gaara vanished for nearly the whole day and reappeared just before midnight. To catch up on things and begin a disaster cleanup plan, he had run all the way back to his desert home. After giving his siblings some words of encouragement, he took off once more, his passion to see the Akatsuki defeated once and for all consuming him. And it wasn't just that. They soon gained notoriety for raiding passing traders, murdering them, and stealing valuable items such as weapons, important information that could be used to reach some of the biggest cities in the great nations, and national treasures. Just the other night, they flooded a significant trading port in the Wave Country, which was referred to as a mass murder because the tidal wave killed, injured, or reported missing over 1,000 people. Not wasting any time on their take over the world plan, the Akatsuki were really beginning to unleash their powers on the defenseless. And that was just 3 days ago. When the former Jinchuriki considered what the dreadful group might do if they weren't stopped quickly, they shuddered. Anyone who knew Naruto well enough to know that he never gave anything more than a few seconds of serious thought would have been shocked to learn that he had been lost in thought ever since all of this had reached their wandering ears. Apparently regarded as the pack's leader, Everyone expected him to have a detailed plan outlining how they were going to defeat the century's most powerful creatures as mere shinobi. He was just as scared and naive as the rest of them, but they thought he had this big entrance, big ass whooping idea that would ease their minds and hearts a little. His motto was to play things by ear and deal with life as it presented itself. He had never in his life really planned anything. He was still a genin, most likely because of it. Therefore, how in the hell was he supposed to lead a well-thought plan that would defeat the world's most powerful being while minimizing the amount of damage to the country and preserving everyone's lives? It was definitely something to consider. With its typically calm waters, lovely, expansive skies, and gentle, comforting breezes that make one feel at home, the open sea was a serene place for even the most anxious people. As Naruto gazed out at the soft waves breaking in the path of the boat he was traveling on, these were precisely the thoughts that were going through his mind. That morning, the group had finally arrived at the southern edge of the Fire Country and boarded a small trading ship that would reach one of the ocean islands in the middle of the afternoon. After several hours of sailing and growing disinterested in the ship's interior, they made the decision to go outside and enjoy the fresh air. However, after taking in the scenery for a short while, the blonde's thoughts kept returning to the problem at hand. And his emotions grew more frantic the more he thought. What if he was unable to come up with anything in time? Even if he came up with a plan, what if the others didn't think it would work? Is it going to work? Would it be sufficient to permanently destroy the Akatsuki? What if someone passed away? Was there a way to avoid putting their lives in danger? And in the end, what if they didn't succeed? Sometimes a child is more intelligent than a teacher. Naruto's eyes grew wide as the voice reappeared. Unfortunately, he always spoke in riddles. His little piece of crazy loved to talk to him about future events or advice. The voice usually has a hidden meaning that must be figured out. The only issue is that I'm terrible at anything mental. With a moan, Naruto put his head in his hands. For a change, could anything ever be simple? He was momentarily distracted from the depressing thoughts racing through his mind by a gentle touch on his shoulder. When he looked up, a soft smile and gentle emerald met his sapphire eyes. She leaned against the railing and said, "I couldn't help but notice your depression. It's like there's a little black cloud hanging over your head now. A daze." Naruto grinned. With an equally sarcastic tone, he shot back, "Nothing gets by you, now does it?" Sakura smiled, but she couldn't help but notice that the boy was clearly in a bad mood because of the way his shoulders were hunched in tension and the way he kept clenching and unclenching his hands. With a sigh, she moved closer and lowered her voice to avoid being overheard by those standing close. Quietly, she said, "You want to tell me what's up?" With a loud sigh, Naruto shrugged and turned to face the vast expanse of cerulean water in front of them. He muttered, "Just thinking, that's all." On his response, Sakura furrowed her brow. "Naruto, I know you well enough that I know when something is bothering you, and that's now. So please, I'm trying to help," Sakura said quietly. The blonde's eyes were lost, vulnerable, and a little frightened as he glanced at his teammate. "I don't know, that's the whole point," Naruto said quietly, wishing he could just jump overboard and float, forgetting everything he was thinking about and becoming an ebb in the ocean. "I've been wondering about the whole attack plan for the past few days, and surprisingly absolutely nothing comes to mind. I know I've never been one for thinking ahead, but really, 4 days and not even a little spark? It's just so frustrating." Sakura, in particular, was surprised because she had only ever witnessed the blonde in a tense situation when Ichiro's ran out of miso ramen. She realized, however, that he was only a child with the entire world on his shoulders after witnessing him cry. Sakura said, "Well, what do you want to do?" Naruto let out a sigh. "That's just it. I need something that doesn't destroy much around us, makes sure it completely takes care of the Akatsuki and that no one loses their lives. But how can I roll that all into one perfect, fool-proof plan? It's impossible." The blonde wept as he struck the railing. Sakura grinned. "Then do exactly that. It doesn't have to be a flashy, amazingly brilliant plan. It just has to get the job done. And nothing can ever be perfect, especially something as delicate and difficult as this. But what is a known fact is that we're going to back you up, no matter what happens." Once more, Naruto moaned. Naruto whispered, looking at the group of teenagers laughing close to the boat's stern, who appeared to be having a great time. "That's what I'm afraid of. What if everything is going downhill and it looks like we're going to be killed? If I ask you guys to retreat, would you do it? Their safety is a high concern of mine." His soft gaze fell on Sakura as he turned around, saying, "And my worries are even higher for you." Surprised, Sakura flinched back. "What are you talking about? Are you saying I'm weak?" No, never. What I mean is, that this isn't your fight and you technically aren't even supposed to be here." I knew from the start survival rates were going to be low and the probability of us returning were even slimmer. But then again, I was never really planning on any of the other Jinchuriki joining up. I thought they'd reject the idea completely, just as I did. I rode on that hope, praying I'd be the only one to step up to the plate, but unfortunately, everyone ended up coming along except for one, who we're going to go get now. Now Sakura was even more perplexed than before. But when the few people that said no refused, you were disappointed, weren't you? She inquired. Naruto grinned. Not really, but I needed to play the part that I was, so it didn't seem like the whole idea was for me to be alone. Unfortunately, that didn't work on 2 levels. 1, the others came along anyway. And 2, you caught up. Now I don't know what to do, he replied. Sakura frowned. She said, you don't have to do everything alone, you know. Naruto let out a sigh. This I have to. Because if anything ever happened to you, if you die in this battle, I'd never be able to live with myself. The brunette exhaled. Sakura gave the teenager a gentle peck on the cheek while grinning softly. His face was slightly flushed as he looked up, startled by the scene. Sakura urged, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. The normally animated boy gave her a little smile. From his tower, the lookout pointed to the approaching land and exclaimed, Captain, the port, it's gone. While holding a telescope. After exchanging glances, the 2 Konoha shinobi sprinted toward the bow while squinting at the approaching features. The largest trading port in the ocean islands was where they were expected to land. However, the lookout was correct, it wasn't present. The city had been reduced to ashes. The docks had fallen into the water, the wood still visible in the pristine shallows, and the boat had landed directly on the shore. Fearing that the attackers might still be nearby, the traders had left quickly. Thus, the Jinchuriki were by themselves in an uncharted territory, searching for a person who might no longer be there. They all stood at the doorway, admiring the view. Silence hung in the air as thickly as smoke, and all that remained of what must have been a great village were heaps of still, smoldering ash. The only thing the Jinchuriki could do was gaze at what remained and wonder. Who did this? Naruto walked slowly into the city of cinders and said solemnly, spread out and search for survivors. Call if you find anyone. Sakura followed the blonde, while the others obeyed and went their separate ways. Her footfalls sent puffs of gray snow into the air as she caught up to him in a few strides. As she searched the ground for signs of life, she whispered, what do you think happened? Naruto scowled. My guess would be the Akatsuki. The last Jinchuriki must have been living here and so they attacked, hoping to get them out of the way before we could get here. He speculated. Sakura inhaled tremblingly as she thought about the instant the place caught fire. The medic whispered, but to destroy everything else? And to take so many innocent lives? Naruto gave a shrug. He turned off to the left, towards some trees, and said, that's the Akatsuki, no form of life matters. Sakura paused, lost in thought, and bit her lip. In search of some indication that some villagers had fled into the woods, Naruto made his way to the tree line. His disillusionment increased as he used his acute vision to scan the forest and ground and discovered nothing but ash. Then something caught my attention. A footprint, a shape in the cinders. His face lit up with a smile, which is a sign of life and a survivor. However, a rustle of leaves arose from above before he could announce the good news. Before Naruto could react, a kunai was being pressed to his throat, the cool metal burning into his skin, after someone had fallen from the branches. At that moment, Kato just so happened to turn toward Naruto and noticed what was going on. Hey! Everyone else immediately moved in the direction of their comrade, some drawing their weapons and others assuming the stance that would allow them to move at a blinding speed if necessary. The figure behind him, however, did not retreat. Rather, he simply tightened his hold and brought the blade even closer to the blonde's neck. He said, loud enough for everyone to hear, don't move or he dies. They immediately came to a halt, exchanging uncertain glances about what to do next. Naruto tightened his jaw. Naruto muttered, it's weak to prey on someone who doesn't have the chance to fight back. The kunai prickled its way under his skin as it edged closer. He heard Sukiya gasp and hissed as he felt blood being drawn. The individual responded, you didn't go easy on the town, now you'll pay. Just as Naruto opened his mouth to respond, a different voice interrupted. Naruto, he's the one you're searching for. Hey, for once, a simple response. Thank you. He didn't receive a response, of course, but it was sufficient. As the slow digging of the kunai came to a halt, Naruto whispered, wait a second here, buddy. We want to know who destroyed this place too. We're your allies. In the silence, the boy behind him stood motionless and unmoving. He finally said in a low voice, why should I trust you? At least it had kept him at bay for a moment, Naruto sighed. Naruto whispered, because we're just like you. The boy gasped in surprise and looked away from his feet, watching the situation carefully as he looked over the crowd, still on guard. The teenager questioned, how can I be sure you're telling the truth? Naruto grinned. Naruto grinned and said, Kato, demonstration please? The boy with the raven hair closed his eyes and nodded his head, focusing intently on the enigmatic stranger's thoughts. The ambusher was completely taken aback when he heard a voice inside his head, and it wasn't his own. As your friends, we are here to keep you safe from the same individuals who set your village on fire. The boy trembled a little as Kato opened his eyes once more and grinned feebly. It still took a lot of energy for him to do that. After a pause, the boy said, I still don't know if I can trust you, but, follow me. He then took the blade away from Naruto's neck. The blonde extended a hand and ran a finger across the wound at the base of his collarbone. Steam arose from the cut, and as soon as his finger was taken off his neck, the smoke dissipated, exposing the cut and potential scar entirely. The teenager mumbled something about foolish hallucinations as his eyes grew wide and he shook his head. He led them to a cave just a short ascent from the mountain's base, in the lower parts of the mountain. A tiny, furry creature emerged from the dark depths and circled around his feet the moment he stepped into the wide, gaping mouth. With a laugh, the boy lifted the creature and placed it on his shoulder. With a loving scratch on the weasel's head, the boy explained, this is Roku. He followed me home one day a few years ago and I've kept him with me since. They continued walking deeper until the last remnants of sunlight disappeared behind them. They were only able to determine the boy's destination thanks to Naruto's acute senses, which led them to the location of the teenager's footsteps. After what felt like an eternity, the dim hallway finally opened up into a large cavern with a ceiling that was perhaps 20 feet high. They were all surrounded by warmth as a small fire roared in the middle of the spacious room, casting a gentle, reassuring glow. Sparks flew into the air as the boy approached the fire and tossed in another chuck of dry wood. His eyes never left his inquisitive guests as he gestured for them to take a seat. When they were all in their proper positions, the boy began to talk. He asked, I think an explanation is in hand. Naruto responded with a nod. He replied, of course, but a name would be great. The boy paused, staring at Naruto's face with bright, snake-like eyes. He sighed at last. He whispered, my name is Daichi, I'm 16 years old. Naruto smiled. This is Sakura, Kato, Sukiya, Gaara, Raya, Mayuri, and Yude. He introduced himself, pointing to each individual as he mentioned their names. My name is Naruto. Daichi gave each person a respectful nod. Naruto smiled at Sakura and said, we're 6 of the 9 Jinchuriki, plus a friend from home. We're on a journey to stop the Akatsuki. The same people who probably burned down your village. Daichi's forehead furrowed. Do the Akatsuki wear black cloaks with red clouds? He inquired. Naruto responded solemnly by nodding. With a sigh, Daichi combed his jet-black hair. With sad eyes, he muttered feebly, that's them all right. When someone was sad, Naruto always felt depressed, so he felt his heart sink. Not even the so-called demonic Jinchuriki, who were essentially just misunderstood children, should have to live in misery, in his opinion. In an attempt to break the heavy silence that pervaded the room, Naruto went on, that's actually who we're after. With the power of our Biju, they plan to take over the world, turning it into their evil empire. We're the only ones that can stop them. Daichi tilted his head in perplexity. Well, if you look at it, we're really the only ones suited for the job. To defeat the Akatsuki, we have to remove the Biju from their systems, sucking every last bit of demonic power from their bodies. Then, the Biju has to go somewhere, right? Well, instead of giving it to someone who has had absolutely no experience controlling them, why not just give them back to the people who knew them in the first place? Naruto clarified, for the first time conveying his entire point of logic. Daichi thought about this a lot, and he wasn't alone. Everyone but the blonde was pondering what he had said. They were aware that he thought they were the only people qualified to stop them, but he had never really explained his reasoning to them. Everything finally fell into place after hearing his full idea. The Jinchuriki who were already on the team realized he was correct and felt embarrassed for even considering rejecting the admirable cause. Daichi's thoughts were scattered as he quickly clicked his teeth together. He said incredulously, so, basically, to save the world, we have to take our Biju back into our own bodies? Naruto nodded, feeling more and more resentful of the whole concept. Daichi, however, was shocked when he asked, so, is this gonna hurt, or what? Naruto stammered a little as he responded, surprised by the teen's casual attitude toward the entire situation. He replied, I really don't care. No. Daichi took this in and nodded. Daichi asked, and you're sure these are the same people that killed the villagers? Naruto gave a nod. He answered, yup, no mistaking the whole red cloud theme. Daichi nodded back, his eyes blazing with rage. Confidently, he declared, then I'm in. I wish to take revenge on these people for what they've done. Naruto grinned empathetically, sounding somewhat like a former teammate. Daichi, I want you to be doing this because you want to, not because you want revenge. Taking a biju back is sorta a big deal. Naruto reminded him. Without hesitation, Daichi gave a nod. I know, and I did answer because of my desires. Revenge is only part of it. The Akatsuki need to be stopped before they do like they did to my village. And I agree. No one knows our demons the same way we do. Who else but us can do it? He said. Naruto grinned. This child was intelligent. Naruto greeted the newest member with a warm handshake and said, well then, welcome to the team Daichi. Daichi grinned. To which he replied, glad to be here. With a loud screech, a hawk suddenly flew in through the opening of the cave. After making several laps around the ceiling, it settled on Naruto's shoulder and elegantly folded its wings against its body. He recognized it as Kakashi's messenger bird, so Naruto furrowed his brow. Only in dire situations did he use him. Fearful of what he might read inside, Naruto carefully opened the little slip of paper that he had taken from the bird's leg. And he was right to be afraid. Naruto on the move are the Akatsuki, and they're going after. The Konoha, the piece of paper crumpled in Naruto's palm as his fist tightened and his soft, cerulean eyes darkened. In an instant, the dry parchment ignited as he whipped the message into the dancing flames. With a shrill screech, the hawk rose into the air and flew in the direction of the cave's entrance. With his teeth clenched in a feral snarl, he growled, damn it. His eyes were hidden behind his hand as it gripped his temples. Sakura approached him slowly and touched the boy's arm tenderly as her brow furrowed in concern. Naruto, she whispered, her emerald eyes questioning. The blonde let out a long sigh while holding in his mind the overwhelming sensations of shock and rage that were brewing inside of him. He growled, the words barely able to be spoken. That was Kakashi's messenger bird, and he brought me a message saying that the Akatsuki are targeting Konoha. Sakura let out a gasp. With wide eyes, the rosette exclaimed, W. What? Horror overpowering her speech, she stammered, well, W. We've got to get moving. Start T. Training harder on the road A. And get back to the fire country as S. Soon as possible. Kato stepped forward. I hate to be the one bearing bad news, but how are you planning on training enough to be stronger than the Akatsuki while traveling quickly on the road? It's logically, not to mention physically impossible, he said with a skeptical expression. With preparation plans racing through his head, Naruto paced the cave. The blonde retorted, I never said we had to be stronger, we just have to be good enough to last. Now that the irate teenager was not making sense, it was everyone's turn to be perplexed. Sukiya asked, well, how could you hope to win if we aren't stronger than them? With a sigh, Naruto squeezed the bridge of his nose. You don't have to be the strongest to win a battle, sure, it makes things go a lot easier for you and victory is probably guaranteed. But then again, even if you are lacking the advantage, you can still succeed if you have enough courage to keep going, and the determination to never give up. Naruto responded with a slightly trembling voice. Sakura gave a slight smirk. It has worked pretty well for you in the past, hasn't it? She asked with a smile, briefly forgetting the tense situation. Shortly after, Naruto laughed and rubbed his forehead as a terrible headache started to form. As the rational voice of reason, Yudai said sharply, but even if we have an ass load of determination, it won't matter if we don't have the skill to live through the first minute. I believe it would be best if we gave this a little more thought. Naruto became unusually serious as his eyes darkened. I was chosen as the leader of this mission, oddly enough. I know I make poor decisions and rush into things headfirst without a proper plan a lot of the time. He murmured. But I will not stand by as Akatsuki destroys my home, and my precious people along with it. The blonde gave each of the other Jinchuriki a fierce look as she looked up. As jailers of the 9 great Biju, you all know what it's like to be an outcast, hated by all and loved by none, but as time goes on, you see that things can change. You all gained a home, and you all made friends. The former Jinchuriki exchanged uncomfortable glances as his words struck home, and it was painful to realize that he was correct. Now let me ask you, would you do nothing when you knew all you held dear to your heart was in danger? Would you run when you knew that you could do something to prevent it? He murmured lowly. The blonde's voice reverberated in their minds, and the cave room fell silent. However, the blonde sighed and combed through his hair before anyone could reply. "I'm sorry, but I'm going back, and whoever wants to follow me can. If you don't, then that's okay. I won't hold it against you." The blonde then disappeared into the darkness as she made her way back towards the cave's entrance. "I know exactly what he means, and I agree with him too, but it's suicide. There's no way we could win against a single Akatsuki member, not in our state. We need more time." Ryu wept as she stalked the campfire. She had been complaining to herself and switching sides for nearly 10 minutes when the group gave a collective sweat drop. Kato said solemnly, "We don't have much of a choice. We can't just leave all those people to die because of us, because of them." With a frustrated sigh, the blonde girl lowered herself to the ground beside Gaara, bringing her knees to her chest. She leaned her head on the sand shinobi's shoulder and muttered, "I know, but that doesn't make anything any easier." Gaara visibly tensed up before melting and lounging against the wall. The rose-haired Cage looked toward the cavern's shadowed arch and reassured, "We just have to trust him, he hasn't steered me wrong before." "I hope you know what you're doing, Naruto." The familiar orange-clad ninja sat on a precarious cliff near the top of the large mountain where Daichi's cave was located, with a view of the ground below that was stories above. He could see the ash mounds from the former big village as well as the entire east side of the island. Naruto let out a deep breath and looked at the forms of houses and stores, now reduced to the bare shadows of their former selves. His normally happy cerulean eyes darkened to a point of malice, and his teeth ground together. He refused to allow Konoha to resemble this unidentified location. He refused to allow the Leaf Village to burn down. The group had been traveling through the vast country of fire for 3 days after leaving Daichi's island. They would only pause for food as they ran from sunrise to sunset. After setting up camp for the day, they would continue to train until the sun had already set. They would then fall asleep, only to start the cycle over the following day. At about noon, Naruto halted their progress, landing in a tiny clearing in the middle of a huge forest, just 2 days away from the Great Leaf Village. The rest of the Jinchuriki stared at him in disbelief as they caught up to him because his pace was a little quicker than theirs. Naruto gave a gentle smile. "You guys have been hauling ass these past few days, training hard, barely getting any sleep. You've all gained a long break, but unfortunately, I can only offer you the rest of the day. I apologize." He continued. Everyone sighed in relief as his words finally sank in, though it took a few seconds. They desperately needed a break because they were exhausted from the pressure of trying to keep up with the blonde. Sukiya demonstrated this by nodding before falling to the ground and falling asleep before her body even struck. Before he stretched out, weak laughter broke out as Kato lifted her bridal style and walked to the tree line, supporting her against a sturdy maple. He was unconscious almost immediately. Sakura saw Naruto had dropped his pack and was heading back the way they had come, hands in his pockets, as everyone settled in for a much-needed nap. The pinkette staggered after him after tearing herself from her spot on the plush grass. She said, yawning, "Naruto, where are you going?" The blonde turned to smile at her with amusement. He shuffled deeper into the woods and said simply, "I have some training I want to get done. I'll be back soon." Sakura's eyes grew wide. Naruto must be just as exhausted as they were, if not more so. His eyes didn't sparkle with energy, and she could see it clearly. Rather, they were lifeless from fatigue. Why didn't he stop, then? But he was gone in a blur, before she could ask him. She also wanted to drag his ass back here and insist that he get some sleep, even though she wanted to chase him. However, she simply lacked the energy to do so. In order to await her friend's return, she dragged herself back to the others, fell to the grass, and dozed off. In the meantime, Naruto groaned as his form sagged on the ground, his body heavy from both weariness and chakra exhaustion. Sleep threatened to end his training session there as his eyes drooped and sweat trickled freely down his face. "No, I must continue. If I don't, my friends will." All of his beloved people's carefree smiles, as radiant as the sun itself, flashed through his mind. Naruto smiled softly, his heart soaring on clouds at the thought of them. But all of a sudden, a flash of red blurred his vision. Their joyful faces vanished, to be replaced by a Konoha on fire, his friends' corpses strewn across the floor. A lone figure emerged from the devastation as the flames broke out. It was Sakura, with blood streaming from her mouth and her clothes ripped in several places. She took a feeble step forward while grunting as her legs trembled. Naruto moved toward her in an attempt to assist her. However, before he could, a red chakra tail emerged from the flames. It slashed out at the pinkette, hitting her hard across the back before Naruto could blink. It sliced right through her skin and into the bone, sending warm crimson liquid flying. His crush collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily, and Naruto's eyes widened. Her eyes dimmed as she looked up at the blonde, pain practically leaking out of them. "Why? Why didn't you have the power? Why didn't you save us?" she exclaimed. Naruto's heart smashed against the soles of his feet, causing tears to prickle at his eyes. His voice got stuck in his throat as he attempted to scream out to her. His legs were stuck to the spot when he attempted to move. Thus, all he could do was watch as the kunoichi died and fell to the ground. Naruto remained silent as his shock took over his thoughts. Anger and fury blended with the deep sadness and agony that tormented his body as he balled his fists. The demon sneered at the teenager standing among the ruins as the flickering flames formed into the hideous head of a fox. His deep, guttural voice rumbled as he growled, "And to think, if you had me, you could have won." His words resonated in Naruto's mind. The blonde gripped his head, his eyes flickering between bloodlust red and sorrowful blue, and at last the tears came, streaming down his cheeks. With a roar that was no longer human, he threw back his head. Everything turned black after that. Sweat. Soaked, Naruto awoke with a shuddering breath. His muscles ached as he gritted his teeth and forced his body off the ground. It was likely close to dinner now, as he noticed first that the sun had sunk further down in the sky. The second was that the heartbreaking pictures were merely a nightmare and he had fallen asleep. For the time being, the blonde got to his feet, trembling under him. With a shaky sigh, he slid into a stance, his teeth clenched, his brilliant blue eyes filled with sheer determination instead of tiredness. "I can save them all by myself, and I don't need your help to do it." The sun had set in a multitude of beautiful hues, and now the last remnants of burnt orange, lazy yellow, and violet red were giving way to the night's dark blues and blacks. The majority of the Jinchuriki had returned from a brief training session, dinner had already been eaten, and a small fire was dancing in the middle of the clearing where the group was spending the night. Panting from the effort of a dead sprint, Kato and Gaara arrived last, running from the forest line. When they heard their thundering footsteps, everyone looked up in hope, but their defeated expressions said more than words could. "Did you find him?" Mayuri inquired, continuing to hope that they had discovered something, despite all odds. Kato turned his eyes away from the floor and shook his head wearily. "No, and we went out a good way away from the camp. I even searched for his thoughts, but nothing. He could be anywhere," the teenager said quietly. There was silence as everyone thought about their own things, such as where he was, what he was doing, or why that bastard had not taken me along. Sakura's throbbing headache only got worse when she leaned her head back against the tree and it struck with a dull bang. She reassured them, easing the tension in the air, "He'll be back, it's not natural for him, he'll be back." Sakura pretended to smile, but she was actually biting her fingernails in rage. They had stopped earlier that day, and Naruto had not returned. Since they had purchased some instant ramen at the previous village where they had stayed, he frequently returned for meals. And what was wrong with her teammate if not even ramen could win him back? Gaara glared dangerously at the tree line and growled, "That's it, something had to have happened to him." Since everyone was experiencing the same emotions, nobody was able to reply. 3 days. Naruto hadn't returned once during their 3 days here. No sign of him had been discovered, indicating that he was ambushed while out by himself by something or someone. In a flash, the sand shinobi was standing and stalking off. "I'm going to look for him." Kato, Yudai, and Daichi quickly surrounded him, blocking his way. The teenager's teeth tightened and his eyes narrowed. With a low, threatening voice, he growled, "Move." The sand was already beginning to snake around his feet when the cork on his gourd popped into the air, and none of the three budged an inch. The other 3 Jinchuriki boys looked at each other uneasily but remained in their defensive stance. "Gaara, you can't go out alone. Whatever picked Naruto off might still be out there, they might be after all of us as well." "I don't care. My friend is out there somewhere and he might need my help, now move, damn it," he screamed, his face devoid of all kindness, his youthful murderous intent leaking out. A rumble shook the ground as the 4 took their fighting positions, and then big pieces of earth burst from the forest floor, trapping the teenagers in place and preventing them from attacking. As they turned to see where the others had been seated, they saw Amiya with her hands flat on the floor, her fingers spread. Any attempt to avoid her trap would be met with a threatening flash of her brown eyes. With a frustrated sigh, Raya walked nimbly up to the arguing friends and met their confused gazes. She began, "We will go back out and search," to which Gaara responded with a grateful smirk. "But we'll go in groups of 2. That way, if whatever is out there attacks one of us, we won't be alone." she said with wisdom. The four of them gave a forceful nod, releasing anything they could. Amiya pulled her hands away from the floor as Raya nodded back. As if they had never truly existed, the large, jagged rocks vanished instantly as they sank into the ground. Kato rubbed his wrists, his enraged red marks indicating that he had been squeezed more forcefully than he had meant. Sheepishly, Amiya said, "Sorry, I didn't know it would be that hard." Kato simply smiled and waved her away. With only a nod from the Pinkette, Raya gave the order, "Okay, the groups will be Kato and Sukiya, Mayuri and Yudai, Daichi and Amiya, Gaara and Sakura. You'll have to stay here, just in case he comes back." Since Naruto vanished, Sakura's anxiety had kept her quiet. When the rest of her friends fled into the forest, leaving her alone in a place where an unidentified enemy might be hiding, she only partially noticed. She could think about Naruto instead of how her friends might be in danger. She was aware that focusing all of her attention on one person was self-centered. However, she was unable to resist. She was afraid that Naruto had abandoned her after Sasuke had. "And you know it's not true. Hurry up and stop it now." Sakura flinched when she felt her inner self yell at her, but her worries soon overcame the surprise. Her fear of loss now replaced her fear of abandonment. What if there had been an injury to him and no one was available to treat it? What if he had been taken prisoner and was currently being subjected to severe torture? What if he had been murdered? Her vision fuzzed as the final thought brought on the tears. She wanted to scream and cry at the thought that her comrade might not be alive any longer, and she wanted to do everything in her power to bring him back. Inner Sakura grinned smugly and said, "Funny, you never went to such lengths to get Sasuke back, even in your thoughts." Sakura's heart pounded in her chest as she pondered, her eyes widening at this realization. What was meant by that? She was unable to have. But before she could process it further, she became acutely aware of the gentle bending of the grass beneath her feet. In a flash, she was standing up, pulling her gloves tighter, making sure they held. She stiffened as the footsteps approached, prepared to strike as soon as her target appeared among the trees. But when a strand of blonde and a sliver of orange were illuminated by the sun, she stopped cold, her heart thumping. "Naruto?" she inquired, her doubts evident. As he entered the clearing, the blonde shinobi smiled. As her teammate approached, observing her with interest, the rosette remained motionless in her spot. "Sakura?" She was startled out of her reverie by his voice, and rage welled up in her emerald eyes. "Where the hell have you been? Do you realize it's been 3 days, 3 fucking days, Naruto? Do you even know how worried I've been? I thought you were dead. I swear, I am going to twist you in such a fashion, you won't be able to feel your toes," she screamed, storming up to the Shin as she positioned herself directly in front of him and pointed a finger at him in the manner of a mother reprimanding a child for removing a cookie from the jar. Naruto held up his hands and leaned back. For a few moments, there was a dead silence as Sakura's angry face remained fixed on the teenager, who could only look back in disbelief. However, the anger quickly left her face, and tears began to fall instead. Naruto's expression changed instantly, with worry taking over entirely. Choosing his words carefully, he said softly, "Sakura, what's wrong?" Sakura turned away, gazing into the shadowy darkness cast by the tree's massive canopies. I thought you were gone. I thought you had left me behind, just like Sasuke did," she murmured. Though he flinched at her words, as if she had slapped him, Naruto had to swallow the gasp that had risen to his throat. His eyes briefly glowed with rage. How could she have ever believed he was similar to Sasuke? However, it vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared, leaving his cool blues glimmering with a warmth that only his eyes could provide. He said softly, "You can't honestly believe that." But when he got no response, he sighed and gently drew her back to face him. He gave her a kind smile and the most considerate expression she had ever seen. "I would never, ever leave you, Sakura, not without good reason. I'm not Sasuke, I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Sakura closely examined the blonde's sapphire eyes, looking for any sign of dishonesty, but she couldn't find any. He was an expert at being completely honest. With a gentle smile, Sakura felt the tears pouring down her cheeks even more. However, she flung herself into Naruto's arms and gave him a tight hug before he could respond. She fought back tears and said, "Please, just come back next time, before I think the worst, okay?" With hesitation, Naruto put his arms around her slim frame and held his friend. He heard her sigh with relief and satisfaction and replied softly, "Okay." When Naruto's path became increasingly challenging, he felt his heart break. He could either honor his pledge to Sakura or he might also be able to save the great nations. He couldn't have both, though. The Jinchuriki were as hurried as ever, and the trip to the great village hidden in the leaves was now only a day long. The group stayed in a small, isolated area in the middle of the vast forest because Naruto had promised them a week to train and recover before acting. Studying the scroll Tsunade had given Naruto about her chakra mark and any medical jutsu she could find. Sakura had been working extremely hard. She practiced repeatedly on dead animals, fish, and even a few plants. Sukiya had been honing her water skills. She had everything from A-rank annihilators to D-rank distracts in her arsenal. In case she needed a source of water, she had painted seals on her arms to hold gallons of water. Specializing in fire, Raya had been developing attacks that she could employ while on the go. She was able to dodge and evade much more easily than some of the others because she was quick and light on her feet. In other words, she would be less likely to be hurt if she attacked closer. She therefore worked on flames that were easy to fly and unaffected by distance. Gaara had a lot to do with his sand, making new jutsu that would, in one way or another, make them useless. Even though he had been working with it for a few years, he focused much more on his affinity for the wind and figured out how to combine it with his sand to launch a more potent and forceful attack. This gave rise to the possibility of aerial attacks, either if they were being bombed or if they were attacking from above. For a while, Kato, who also wielded fire, collaborated with Raya, but only on control. Similar to the Rasengan, he was able to breathe tiny flames without the use of hand signals while he was the host of a biju that resembled a dragon. Therefore, he concentrated more on turning that slight advantage into something that could deal more damage farther away. He trained with stronger, more powerful jutsu that were better suited for long-range attacks and dealt more damage, but had to be applied to a stationary or barely moving target. Additionally, he aimed to develop his mind-reading skills to the extent that he could forecast the Akatsuki's movements. Mayuri and Gaara also trained together in the wind affinity, but she concentrated more on the pure element itself when Gaara was mixing his sand with wind. She used her high intelligence to create a more divined wind attack that would counter an attack thrown at them or even encase someone, even though she was unable to train her glare to be more paralyzing. Yude focused mostly on defense because he possessed the earth element. He could climb to higher altitudes, see the battlefield more easily, and erect a barricade for anyone who might require it because he could easily scale walls. Additionally, he honed his tracking abilities by spending hours in the forest tracking different animals. The Akatsuki could scope them out in any circumstance if he threw a bag over their eyes. Another Earth user, Amiya, spent the remainder of her time practicing the attack but only learned 1 or 2 defensive jutsu. She is practicing the various types of earth, including rock, dirt, and mud. She wanted to work it until it could produce an attack that would actually cause more damage than a dent because she could move tiny amounts of earth. In addition, she carried a pouch of pure soil, which she could use to make tiny rocks if she needed a quick hit. Finally, Daichi had to learn a variety of offensive and defensive techniques simultaneously because he was the only one with a lightning element. He was able to move more quickly than the others in the group, with Rei's pace being slightly slower than his. In order to attack before anyone could even see him, he moved in blurs. He would also be their best close-range fighter because of his flexibility, which would make it much easier for him to escape confined spaces. Nobody was aware of what Naruto had been working on. Although they were aware of his affinity for the wind, he had not trained alongside Gaara or Mayuri. Though he hadn't been with Rei or Kato, Kyuubi had been fire. During the 7 days they were posted, he was actually hardly ever in the camp. He only came back for meals and left as soon as he was done. Around midnight, when everyone else had fallen asleep, he would return for a nap, and by the time they woke up, he would be up and gone. Furthermore, he refused to disclose to them any information about his actions. Everyone would argue about what he could be working on alone, in a location that even Yude couldn't find, at one point. Their biggest conundrum was that, despite occasionally hearing the tiniest explosion sounds and feeling the earth tremble, they were never able to locate a single crater or scar on the area surrounding their hiding place. Furthermore, Naruto never left any trace of his whereabouts or activities when he returned. Our pink-haired medic was beginning to get concerned about it. She could see the anguish in his eyes whenever he moved, spoke, or breathed, even though he had no scratches. She occasionally woke up early in the morning when Naruto was still asleep, sweating profusely and writhing in his sleep due to a mental issue. At other times, he would be so unconscious that he wouldn't even be awakened by a head slap. Someone like him could only be knocked off their feet in that way by extreme chakra exhaustion, which could be a serious condition if it occurs too frequently in a short amount of time. One day, sometime between lunch and dinner, Sakura was sitting in the camp reading scroll after scroll while everyone else was busy training nearby. Naruto then entered the camp. When Sakura saw his condition, She looked up and was about to inquire as to whether he would be taking a true break today when she gasped. His undershirt was nearly ripped to pieces over his chest, and his clothing was ripped in many places. His skin was covered in burns, bruises, and cuts, many of which were bleeding heavily, and his pants had been cut down to knee-length shorts. Although he wasn't limping, Sakura could see that he was shifting more of his weight to his left hip and favoring that side. She yelled, "Naruto, what the hell happened?" as she jumped over to her friend and slipped under his arm, dropping the parchment beside her. With a sigh, he gave her a tiny bit of his shoulder strength so she could walk the remaining distance. Slowly, the pinkette lowered him against a tree's thick trunk. Her hands instantly lit up in a gentle green glow as she knelt beside him, rubbing the smallest wounds and scrapes first because they would heal the quickest and relieve some of the pain on his face. He hissed and backed away as she passed over his right hip, gritting his teeth to withstand the intense pain. Sakura flinched and withdrew rapidly. "I'm sorry," she exclaimed, and the blonde gave her a hurt laugh. As Sakura started to mend the broken bone, he moaned and bit his tongue until he tasted blood. No, it's not your fault. I think I might have broken my hip bone, that's all." Sakura let out a sigh. How had she missed the fact that his hip was severely torn up? Additionally, all of these wounds appeared to be days rather than minutes old. How could she have been unaware of all this? Observing her distressed look, Naruto smirked, speculating about her thoughts. The blonde said bluntly, "I used a genjutsu to cover it up." His teammate frowned. Anger brewing in the pit of her stomach, she gave the blue-eyed teenager a menacing glare. "Are you crazy? Why hide this? It should have been treated ages ago. I can't believe I didn't sense a genjutsu. Geez, what kind of shinobi am I? I mean, I saw you were in pain, but I never knew it was this bad. Come on Naruto, how could you've trained with a shattered hip bone?" She chided, noticing that the bone shards were healed. Sakura sighed and Naruto grimaced. Fixing a bone was always one of the most agonizing medical operations. It was not going to be comfortable, for sure. He responded with ease and indifference to the entire situation, which only increased Sakura's anxiety. "I haven't been training with a broken hip, that happened just today. A few hours ago I was thrown back from a blast and hit a sharp rock. I think that must have done it. I came back when it really started to hurt. Even I know that someone can't go on with an injury like that without serious consequences." How could he have been so indifferent to his fate? Did his training really matter? And what was he doing, if that's the case? Without raising her eyes from her work, she whispered, "Naruto, what are you working on out there?" Naruto remained quiet as he considered his response without upsetting her. He finally sighed and said, "I'm truly sorry, I can't tell you." Sakura looked up, fear, worry, and concern in her jade eyes. With sparkling eyes, she begged, "Please, tell me. I'm really starting to worry about you." Naruto detested that expression, so he bit his lip. She knew that every time she gave him that look, he bowed to her will. She should be cursed for using it against him when he was weak and unable to leave. Her voice was barely audible as she repeated, "Naruto, what are you hiding?" The blonde leaned his head back against the rough bark of the tree and let out a loud exhale. For once he accepted the aching points that sprouted with each painful bang of his head against it. It diverted his attention from the matter at hand. Even though Sakura was anxiously watching him, she was still curious. With a sigh, Naruto turned his back on the Konoha Kunoichi. "I'm sorry Sakura, but you'll just have to trust me." A huge fire was roaring through the tiny area on the final night of their camp before Naruto was scheduled to enter Konoha, and a column of smoke was twisting and twirling into the starry night sky. Avoiding the inevitable question, Sakura and the 9 former Jinchuriki sat around the dancing conflagration, laughing and relishing their time as friends. Would they make it through to live like this once more? Naruto eyed each of his friends as he looked around the fire. Gaara. He had known him all his life, and despite their near-death experience in their youth, they had grown close in the last few years. The blonde denied it, believing that Naruto had always desired peace in his heart. The redhead, on the other hand, always claimed that Naruto's heart and resolve were what transformed him from the heartless murderer he once was. He simply had to be beaten to realize it. Raya. Coming face.to. Face in a high-locked jail designed for the most dangerous of criminals made their encounter in the prison cell deep in that godforsaken forest less than ideal. He recalled that there was always a guard close to their barred door, listening in on everything, so they couldn't even make outspoken plans of escape. She had developed into an excellent sarcastic friend and ally. Sukiya. She reminded him of Hinata in a way. She was quiet and gentle, yet fierce when she felt like it. Although it hadn't influenced Naruto's thoughts, Sukiya had a strong desire to support her deceased demon, which made her despise the blonde when they first met. Their Biju had been enemies for decades. However, he discovered that she was inherently affectionate, and her feelings changed almost immediately, particularly after he was taken prisoner. Kato. He met the other Jinchuriki while incarcerated. He had been adept at predicting what people would say before they had completed their sentences, but it turned out that this was just the beginning of his Biju abilities. Fire against wind, sparring with him, was an interesting match because he was a formidable opponent. He consistently delivered powerful blows, sometimes exhausting him from mere defense. The teenager with the raven hair also enjoyed pulling practical jokes. Mayuri. As soon as he had witnessed her protecting the child from the bullies in the village, he had known she would be difficult to reason with, even if it meant giving someone the glare, as they called it, which would paralyze them. Nobody knew if it was a power or just plain fright. In any case, it worked, and based on his recent experience, he can honestly state that you were immobile while she was staring at you. Yude. The person who resisted their plan the most was apparently Mayuri's old friend. He had flatly refused, and even though Naruto had accepted it on the outside, he had been depressed and felt lost on the inside. The hope that all 9 Jinchuriki would join him was the foundation of his actual plan. It wouldn't work without even one of them. At the time, he had thought he would be going off to face the Akatsuki by himself, leaving the rest of the group behind. Fortunately, Yude arrived after they were ambushed and saved the day, proving that he was mistaken. He was now one of the biggest supporters of what they were doing and was completely on their side. Amiya. They had just retrieved the girl from Demon Country and they hadn't discussed much during their meeting. They had discovered her on a lakeshore, enjoying a gentle summer day in the sun, just outside the village that was said to be her home. They discovered that although she did reside in the nearby village, the residents had mistreated her since she was a young child. She had been so severely beaten by them that she had no way of defending herself when the Akatsuki arrived to help. But despite everything, she remained gentle and kind, supporting the underdog in a fight because she knew what it was like. Daichi. His home, friends, family, and village had all been destroyed, or he had fled but never come back. The teenager never described the connections that had resided there, but he also never denied that he had been by himself when the Akatsuki arrived at his house. Daichi, who understood firsthand what it was like to lose one's home to ashes, was one of the few who supported Sakura and Naruto, even though the majority of the others opposed the idea of hurrying to help Konoha. Sakura. Since he had known her for so long, he already knew everything, so there wasn't much to say. Since they graduated from the academy more than 4 years ago, they had been teammates. He was aware that she fought fiercely, particularly when she was upset. She had repeatedly saved his ass, so he knew she was an excellent medic. Even though she had a deranged obsession with Sasuke and detested Naruto in their early shinobi years, he knew that she was a supportive friend. However, a lot had changed since then. He could safely say that she liked him much more now, even though he couldn't discuss her crush on the Uchiha. And just thinking about it brightened his entire day. As Naruto considered all of this, an idea struck him. They may not survive this ordeal. His heart skipped a beat and his blood boiled at the thought, sending his mind into a panic. He began plotting right away, intending to. Disrupting the waves of conversation, Amiya stood up. She reached for a nearby empty jug and gave it a gentle shake while grinning. As she started to leave, she said, "We're all out, and we still need to cook dinner. There's a small stream nearby. I'll be back soon." Grinning, Daichi jumped from his spot on the ground and walked to meet her. Amiya smiled slightly when Daichi said, "I'll come with you." She gave a nod, and the two disappeared into the forest before you could blink. Just a few minutes later, Daichi dashed back into the campsite as if he had the whole world on his heels. He could hardly stop before crashing into the stones surrounding the flames, his eyes wide and frantic. Everyone's questions poured out, bombarding the gasping teenager. He took a deep breath and held up a hand to try to catch his breath. At last he looked up, his face flushed with terror. "It's the Akatsuki, Amiya, they have her." His tirade was followed by silence, save for the crackle of the fire. The faces of those around the campsite were adorned with grief and anxiety as horror overcame them. "What?" Sakura finally exclaimed, shattering the group's shield of silence. Daichi's legs buckled under his weight as he fell to the ground. He gasped, his chest heaving from lack of breath. "We were in the woods, I don't know where they came from. It was the guy with a weed for a head, he just came up from the ground, and took her," he said. With a heavy sigh, Naruto put his head in his hands. As though it hadn't been difficult enough, he found it increasingly difficult to laugh or smile these days, even in the presence of his friends, as the stress of this entire mission began to eat away at the once limitless vault of happiness. He vehemently detested the sensation, which he perceived as alien to his body. Gazing around the circle, Gaara asked out loud, "So, what do we do?" Kato shrugged, the turmoil raging in his system depicted in his eyes. With her gaze fixed on the dancing flames, Raya remarked, "Well, we can't just leave her to die in their hands." Yude emphasized, his heart heavy as his mind raced through the various outcomes and possibilities of the situation. "Yeah, but we can't just wander in there without a plan. And a little more training. We'd get our asses handed to us, easily." "Naruto," Mayuri said in a whisper as she looked at the blonde. Each person turned to face their leader, who stood motionless in his place, his eyes expressionless and spectral. The teenager leapt silently from his spot on the ground and moved silently toward the tree line, where the glow of the fire hardly reached the base of the trunks. He struck out, slamming his fist into the maple's bark before anyone could question him about what he was doing. Splinters flew in all directions as the wood broke. With a loud crash, the tree's top fell to the ground as the broad trunk broke. Everyone was waiting impatiently, anticipating a brave response from their leader, but they were all shocked by what he said. Before vanishing into the forest's shadows, he said, "I don't care."
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.